two other, one was an ape-like strain of animal from Nibiru, and the other was a monkey strain. It was a strain of monkey primate from from this planet. And what they came up with, or what we call, our scientists call, the Neanderthal. That was the beginning, and that's where the Neanderthals fit in. These had nothing to do with human evolution. They weren't a part of it at all, but boy, have they tried to put Darwinian theory in there, so we start to think of ourselves as them. All right, so they created the Locust Neanderthal. They were called the Locust. They were a primate hominid slave race, and they were able to create them, and they had a certain sophistication of intelligence, even though other ways they were very slow-witted compared to what a human is now, even now as Homo sapiens. But they had genetics that had a little bit of the angelic human imprint because of the part that they had literally robbed from the gene code. It's like grabbing a body, killing the person, but taking part of the DNA and using a select part of that DNA to cross it with other DNA. This is how they did it. It's laboratory messing. All right, so that created the slave races of the Neanderthal in 246,000 BC. There was, and this was like the beginning of a new wave of evolution after the Rama Wars and the Temple Wars, where they created a mess. I mean, it was getting close to becoming another Electric Wars situation where everything got destroyed. And finally, there were some agreements made. And in 246,000 BC, the Maharaji, which are the blue humans from Sirius B, on behalf of the Iani and the founders, brought in the Emerald Covenant restatement, which was brought in the information about the Emerald Covenant again, brought in the CDD plates, and said, any of you, be you hybrid or not, if you want to join the Emerald Covenant, you can. So this is when we were given the last set of CDD plates, the ones that we're drawing information from now. They were given in 246,000 BC. Now, interestingly, all of the angelic humans agreed to, yes, of course we want to do Emerald Covenant. We've always been Emerald Covenant. But the Toth Enki Anunnaki decided to go over into the Emerald Covenant at that period. So that was 246,000 BC, when Toth, as a being, Toth was an Anunnaki being, entered the Emerald Covenant for bioregenesis to get their DNA template back. Now, Toth went through, as a person, went through his own levels of bioregenesis, and he did very, very well. He got up to 11 strands, but he didn't get the 12th one before he bailed out and went the other way. But the Toth Enki Anunnaki races, they entered for bioregenesis, and there was a series of steps in this bioregenesis that was taken. It wasn't all, you didn't get all of the strands healed immediately. There was a progressive integration of one strand after another that would take place over numerous generations to slowly build up the pattern of the D12, the angelic human hybrid strand would be put into the Anunnaki strands. What it would do is if you look at the strands, is one angelic human strand had all the natural mathematics of the divine blueprint that goes with this time matrix. The Anunnaki strand had it all in reverse and didn't have 12, units. Okay, so we have 12 units in one angelic human strand. They only had 11 units. The draconian ones only had 10 units in each strand. So they had to progressively, for each strand, build up a 12 subharmonic pattern where they'd get that extra back and reverse it back to its natural mathematics before they would be compatible with the frequencies in the natural time matrix, before they could run the divine blueprint frequencies again. So this was what this experiment was about. It wasn't an experiment to see what had happened. It was an experiment that was done, a healing experiment that had the objective of healing this particular group of Anunnaki who decided to go into the Emerald Covenant. In 208,216 BC, this was a stellar activation cycle, and consistently with the rest of our history, during every stellar activation cycle, there was an invasion of some sort, and there was a Drac invasion. This time it created what was called the Fall of Brennaway. This was when, literally, in doing the round tables, all right, the rainbow round tables that the guardian races were always appointed to do to run the Templar here in order to assist the planet in grounding the Stargate frequencies. They were infiltrated and invaded, and the rounds began being run in reverse because people were careless and there was a lot of intermarrying between Nephilim, draconian hybrids that supposedly were being good guys now working the Emerald Covenant, and angelic human races. And angelic humans didn't realize that they were getting code reversals in their DNA template. So when they ran the rounds, they ran them in reverse. And it created, there's a major pole shift that took place in that period, because again, the gates had to be shut. They had to be shut, or our whole template, Earth's template, would have gone into phantom matrix completely. So in 28216 BC is when we lost our ability to run D12 frequency, because what's called the stellar bridge, which is that frequency spiral, the Merkaba spiral of the universal level, that spirals the frequency down from D12 through all the universal gates to us, it's supposed to anchor on what's called a 12-code pulse. 12-code pulse means every dimensional frequency band has 12 subharmonics. It didn't. It anchored on a 10-code pulse, and they blocked the other part out with the reversal of the round tables. So from that point on, we were like sitting ducks here, because we didn't have D12 frequency available. We only had D10 frequency available. That means we couldn't reset anything with the divine blueprint without the D12 frequency to come in and reset it. So after this, there was, life went on. There was a pole shift, and there was a bringing the races during these times were taken into the inner earth, like the angelic human races, and any of the hybrid races that could sustain the strand activation would be taken into inner earth and allowed to hang out there until it stabilized on the surface. Then they'd be brought back out. And the angelic humans were always reseated on the 24 sites, the 12 Q sites and the 12 Stargate sites. That was their home, and their DNA is literally keyed to those grids. So we all have literally a place on the planet that we belong to, and it technically belongs to us. We belong to each other. All right. Now, in 155,000 BC, this is when the Anunnaki bioregenesis program begins in full. Now, way back in 246,000 BC is when the Tothenki group entered the Emerald Covenant, but it wasn't until 155,000 BC, because of all the chaos that was going on, that it actually began, where the hybridization program began. And the Lucas Neanderthal races, because they had a little bit of the human imprint, were used as the base species for this hybridization. So the Lucas Neanderthal were combined with a pattern, a piece of the DNA from another race called the Hibernian humans. The Hibernian humans had to do with seeding too, and certain races that were created through hybridizing between human and Anunnaki races. They were a type of Nephilim, actually, Nephilim human, but they were of the Ruby order that were trying to get their full imprint back originally. So upgrade number 1, they went from Locust Neanderthal to what are called the Luhari, which was Cro-Magnon 1. And then in 152,000 BC, the Luhari hybrids were crossed with the Urantia Urtite cloister humans, and upgrade 2 was done, and they created the Iluli Levi. Here we get the races of Levi and such. This is where we get the word Leviathan. Now, the Iluli Levi, Cro-Magnon 2, was the first one of the hybrids that was capable of natural procreation with a human, where it could actually conceive a child and bear a living child with a human. The others were still not genetically compatible to that degree, where fertilization would most often not occur, and if it did, it would be highly mutated and it would die. The child could not be born by them. This began the chaos, technically speaking, because if you now have a hybrid race, and if you get a hold of that hybrid race and you're a fallen angelic, and you know that race can now naturally procreate, all you have to do is have your hybrid race rape humans, and you will create progressively more of your own in human form. And this is what began the craziness that became the Leviathan invasion. But the bioregenesis continued for the races. The Tothenki groups were still a part of this. They were still working with it. And the Tothenki groups are interesting because, remember how I said before, they were the Anu Seraphim, which means they were Anunnaki combined with certain of the fallen Seraphim, which are the Draconians or the Reptilians. So they could actually, by using their DNA, they could actually allow for both Draconian races to incarnate into them and Anunnaki races. So it was a hybrid form that could be used to do bioregenesis for both fallen Seraphim races like the Draconians or Reptilians and fallen Anu Elohim races like the Anunnaki. That was also part of the downfall, because both of them could infiltrate that race, therefore. All right. So 152,000 BC, we had Cro-Magnon II, the Eluli-Levi races. From the Eluli-Levi races, it went up from there. 151,000 BC, upgrade 3 was done. Eluli-Levi became Eluli-Judah. This is where we get the races that were transposed in our biblical text. They're not our tribes of Israel. These are the tribes of the Leviathan, and they were not part of those original biblical texts. The original 12-tribe human races were part of those original texts, and they transposed their race identity and their records into our books. Okay. 150,000 BC, there's a mess, but we had a glacial period after that one because the Jehovian Anunnaki attacked here and tried to take over, but they didn't win. But they crashed the firmaments, which are called hydrosuspension fields, that controlled the planetary climate. We actually had planetary climate control at various periods, where you could, kind of like your car or your house, you can set it on climate control, how much humidity you want, what temperature you want, that kind of thing. You can do that with the crystal pylon temples of inner Earth, of the, Eka line. They can modulate the frequencies here in a way that through our gates we can get climate control. And, when they're working properly. So in the Jehovian wipeout in 150,000 BC, we had a glacial period because a large part of our firmaments, or the hydrosuspension fields, collapsed. 148,000 BC, the next upgrade was done. The upgrade 4 created the Eluli Nephi races. And then there was a whole bunch of these guys, the Nephi races, that were infiltrated by Jehovian Anunnaki and created the what are called the Nephites. This is why certain teachings say, hail the return of the Nephites. They're supposed to be coming back in this time period. Not something to hail unless you're looking forward to becoming a Jehovian Anunnaki. And these large numbers of these have joined the Wesedek groups, from this history forward. So the return of the Nephites has to do with the return of the Metatronic coding. Here we go again. Every stage of this hybridization program had its pros and its cons. Meaning pros, that it was actually serving the purpose it was intended for the ones who stayed in the Emerald Covenant, the Toth groups, then other ones that came in. One of the ones that came in later, I believe, in fact in this period, I think, this is the first period they came in, 148,000 BC, the being called Enoch, who had been an ascended master, and the good guy side had come in and incarnate specifically through the Jehovian Anunnaki fallen pattern to be able to try to bring them back up into bioregenesis. The Enoch crew got involved, and these were the Arcturian Jehovian Anunnaki races from the Arcturus system, from Orion and Arcturus, and they were different from the Pleiadian and Iberian ones, and they tended to not like each other very much. They got involved with the Nephi level. They came into the experiment at the Nephi level. And so then you had two groups of Leviathan race, Leviathan because they're all out of Levi, but usually we use Leviathan in terms of the Illuminati, what became the Illuminati. But there were two branches of these hybrid races that were created. One were the sons of Belial, and the others were the sons of Zadok. All right. And these are... which were the reversals of, they were originally the sons of Lilib, the Lilibim, which were Toth's crew, the ones that were on the good side. And this is where you get like the Lilith mythologies that come out of that. And the Zadokim, or the Kodazim. And they actually reversed the letters once groups of them became, fallen. They reversed them, so you had the Lilibim turned into the sons of Belial, and you had the Kodazim becoming the sons of Zadok. And these became prominent figures in the Atlantean period. I mean, at this point, we're still not into the height of Atlantean culture yet. Atlantean civilization really didn't come into being until, when was it? When the Atlantean root race was seeded. Atlantis was, the place was there, the cloister races were there, but it wasn't technically called Atlantis. That was a root race. It was a smaller race than the human cloister races that were coming in. It was a smaller branch of the human races. So anyway, this is the step-by-step process that the Leviathan or the Illuminati races were created from. They were progressively crossed, and the idea was to get them up to strand 5, where they would take the reverse 11 DNA pattern and work strand 1 all the way up to strand 5 into non-reversal through the hybridization, at that point they could pass through Stargate 5 into the Terran time field in density 2. You could get them out of here, and they could continue their evolution from there to get the next set of strands. But all along, every step of the way, there were raider races, fallen angelics, that came in and grabbed portions of them and hybridized with them and then used them as tools to create their little armies where they would go raid other villages. I mean, it's still, even in our recorded history, it's classic, the plundering of one group that conquers another. They come in, they rape the women, they, trash the society, they force their belief systems on them. Well, there are continually more children being born by the raping of angelic human females. They would very often come into a village, raid it, kill the males, and rape the females, and kidnap them, keep them until they found out whether they conceived or not. And if they conceived, they would, bear the children. There was a big hatred vibe that a lot of women carry from being a part of that time period where they hate children. And when they have their own children, they don't mean to hate children, but this emotional thing comes up where there's almost a desire to kill children because there was a violation that was done in that period, like in this pre-Atlantean period, where you were being forced to carry something that somebody else forced you to get pregnant with that was not going to have a human soul. It was going to have a fallen angelic soul. They would birth dark avatars in this way, and the women that were angelic humans that were forced into this type of breeding felt not only violated, but they knew they were contributing to the potential downfall of this planet. So there was a whole movement in the female consciousness that went into killing their offspring whenever they could, because they knew the souls coming into them were not human, and they were, of the other side. So this is some of the stuff we're still healing on a deep level. Women have a lot of that, and there's an anger that was in men. They felt very emasculated in the whole situation. They come in and be killed. They didn't want them for anything because they weren't gestation chambers like females were. So there's a lot of things we're still processing from this period. The Leviathan races, by the time we got up to, let me see, where, the last, number 5, the fifth upgrade. The fifth upgrade didn't come until 68,000 BC. That's because there was a whole lot of other crazy things, like from 148,000 BC to 75,000 BC. That's a long period of time. It was called the Anu occupation. Humans actually lived underground because the Pleiadian, Nibiru, and Anunnaki had got together and they'd come in and they'd taken over surface Earth. So they literally took over surface Earth and destroyed anything that wasn't of theirs, and were trying to either kill or kidnap and use human populations. So literally human civilization went underground. A lot of us will have cellular memory that's about that, where we'll actually remember times when we were so sensitive we could hear a footstep hundreds of feet up above us, because we lived underground. There are still many chambers that are left of the civilizations that were there, and there are other ones that were run by the negative ones as well, because there were periods when they went underground in relation to the dinoids, the dinosaur things. But anyway, because of the craziness that took place, that's a very long period of time. This is why the Anunnaki decided they owned the planet, because they come in and stole it, so they figured it's theirs. That's the typical, it's really the typical thing. If you look at any of the politics that we're in the middle of right now, I mean, they're all fighting over stuff they stole from somebody else in the first place. It's like, anyway, when we get up to 68,000 BC, they finally did the last upgrade, and this was taking them from the Eluli Nephi up to the Anu Melchizedeks. This is where they were crossed with the fifth strand. They picked up the fifth angelic human DNA strand, the cloister strand of the Melchizedeks. And this is out of these guys, they end up with the Templar Melchizedeks. And the Templar Melchizedek priesthood, which is the total opposition to the cloister. Once in a while, when they decide to enter the Emerald Covenant, they actually assist. But most of the history, the Templar Melchizedeks were the ones that were the front men and beings for the Weesadeks. And there was a version of them that were also in the Phantom Matrix. So you had a division between them. One was for the Weesadek bonding, the other, Metatronic bonding. The other group of them was for the Phantom bonding. But both of them were not anything to do with the Emerald Covenant. And right now, most of the Melchizedeks on the planet, the ones that woke up first, the ones that are going around and transmitting frequency to everybody and initiating them into the Melchizedek priesthood. Most of them are Templars, which means most of them are Anunnaki. So, anyway, this was the progression, and I wanted the people who didn't hear this before to understand the progression of where these Leviathan Illuminati races that we talk about, where they came from. And it also answers the question of the Darwinian stuff. Where did the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon, where do they fit? Were these our human ancestors? No, they were not. They were the hybrid ancestors. The only connection to human they had was a little bit of human genetics that was put into their pattern to assist them to evolve to a higher level. They are not what we came out of at all. But there's been a whole movement since Atlantis. It was part of the Luciferian covenant, which was an agreement made by the fallen Anu Elohim races, the Anunnaki races, that they would progressively orchestrate something called transposition of race identity, where progressively, using radio body programming, using progressive genetic infiltration, they would transpose their race identity over the angelic human and the indigo race identity, and they would take over the planet. And taking over the planet meant bringing it into Phantom and then into Wesedek matrix. So this has been a long, long process here. This will give you some idea of how much we've all invested in this drama. There's a lot of vested interest going on here. This is why they're not going to say, oh, they're busted, they're blowing the whistle on us, they're telling on us, we'll just go away. They're not going to do that. This is the ending point of this drama and the beginning of a new series of dramas. 3 new ones, in fact, 3 new paths of Genesis. Now, from Atlantis, I want to show you really quickly. We start with the fact that you have these races, one collective of hybrids that are being run by the Thoth collective that are Pleiadian Nibiruan, and another group that came from the Nephi level and up that were run by the Enoch group. Now, the Enoch group was representative of the Jehovian Anunnaki, the ones that considered themselves the pure strains, that they weren't mixed with the Seraphim. Then you had the Thoth ones that were the Anu Seraphim, the mixed ones. So you had 4 basic groups at this point. You had the Lilibim, which were the ones of Thoths that were still on the Christos evolutionary path, and then you had the ones that were made of reversing the DNA of those guys, and they were the sons of Belial. And you had on the Enoch side the Kodazim, which were the ones still in the Christos path, and then the Zadokim, the sons of Zadok, which were the ones who went into reversal. Now, they didn't go into reversal all at once. There were experiments being made by hijacking them at every stage of evolution, but it really came to a head where the formalization of the sons of Belial and the sons of Zadok came in the Atlantean period after 25,500 BC. It began with 22,326 BC when Thoth's group went defected from the Emerald Covenant, and Thoth made deals with the Anunnaki races from Alpha and Omega Centauri. This is what you get where you get the Alpha and Omega order Melchizedek races or Melchizedeks. For anybody that knows about the Melchizedek, ordination systems, they say, we are of the Alpha Omega order. You'll also find that in books like the Enoch books, of the Alpha and the Omega. When Thoth made deals with the Alpha Omega order Wesedek Anunnaki hybrids, this is when the fire sword initiations began, which means this is when he allowed his hybrids that he was put in charge of their evolution and getting them back into the Christos pattern. He allowed them, without asking them, he allowed them to begin receiving the frequencies transmissions of the flaming blue sword of Archangel Michael, that D13 reverse current that would begin the process of reversing their whole template. That began technically in 22,340 BC, right before the 326 BC, the 22,326 BC still activation cycle. That was the beginning of bringing fully into our race line the Metatronic distortion. And that was demonstrated in certain ways by making them powerless. Stick them over here someplace on the planet and then have big bad storms come and get them, and then have something come down and say, we control the storms, which they did. They could control, by the crystal technologies, the dome. You call it the dome here. It's a natural hydrosuspension field that was very actively controlled consciously in Atlantis. It was set up with apparatus that had to do with massive crystals that were buried underground in relation to the Stargate lines, and you could, ley lines, and they were able to generate somewhere in one of the texts, one of the like obscure little details of stuff for one of the books. I don't know which one it's going to go in. They explain the hydrosuspension fields and how they worked, and what they did with like ions in the atmosphere and that kind of thing, and how it allowed them climate control. And as long as that was working, climate control worked. But right now, there's only little parts of that are still operational. But the people of Atlantis were set up in a situation where they began to worship these big guys that came down from the sky in their fancy little ships, or some of them would pop in through portals and that kind of thing. And if you can't do it and they can, that's real impressive. Like, if me and us could like appear and disappear before you, you'd be like, wow, yeah, well, listen to these guys. They know something we don't, right? Yeah. And we're working on it with you. We can tell you how to do it, but we can't do it yet either. But we can tell you the mechanics. But these are the games that were being played. Right now we have things like crying statues and those kind of things that are happening. It's the same people that are doing them. The ones that are making Mother Mary statues cry and blood come out of the hands of crucifixes and these kind of things. This is all holographic insert technology. And this is the stuff that was used to pull the wool over the eyes of the Atlantean peoples. And it got to the point where there was one of the biggest reasons, I think, that the Olympian gods were very much into fornication and all sorts of other things that would produce children, was because the more of them there were, the more they would have an army to take over. And it was, go forth and multiply over and over and over again. We don't even care who you do it with. Just make lots of them, right? It started in Atlantis. And you had competing groups of fallen angelic races. Like Zeus's crew might not like Apollo's crew for 2 centuries or something, So they compete with each other, and they wouldn't let them intermarry with each other, and they'd there was a manipulation going here that if you read the Greek mythologies, it was really that bad. To the point where, yes, there were these big gods from the sky that were pulling strings, and they'd do nasty stuff if you didn't, sacrifice to them and that kind of thing. The Greek mythology, the Roman mythology was true, and that is, in that sense, there really were these big people up there. And that's something that I think that I felt here with the little bit of the Greek people that we've met. A part of them knows this. They know there is a truth to those stories, where in America it's like, oh yeah, the Greek mythology stuff, It's like, it's neat, it's romance, it's like, fairy tale, that kind of thing. These guys know it wasn't a fairy tale. They know there was some substance to it. That substance became mythology after a key moment in time. It was in 9558 BC. That is a point in time when the groups of different Leviathan races, on the orders of their fallen angelic kin from the Phantom Matrix, orchestrated the flood, the Great Deluge. That was the Great House Cleaning period. There was a couple of times from that point going up further to like 3470 BC. This was another point in time that there was a significant thing that happened that led to what we call the cultures here, the Minoan culture. This is where they begin to fit into the picture. I'll start with 3407. What became the Minoan people weren't just the Italic peoples. They were peoples that came just here to hide. They came in exile from Atlantis because progressively, since the flood, it was chaos. But even before the flood, you had an influx of indigo children, particularly Magi Grail lines, because they were really after them. If they could find a Magi line, first thing was to force the women to breed so you could get a baby that had the codes and then get rid of the rest of the Grail line. So since the flood of 9558 BC, there had been a progressive exodus of movement of the Ionian, of the Magi Grail lines into various regions. Some went to France, some in what we call France, and I think it was called Gaul then, but it was, some went to France, some literally went down into the Middle East area, some are in Afghanistan, and some went over into this area. The ones that went into this area, that's called Greece now, were of the Celtic Druidic descent. Now, Celtic Druidic, it was Celtic and Druidic, just like you had Toltec and Olmec, okay? These were Atlantean tribes of the 12 tribes races. They were a Grail line. The Druidecs were the Magi Grail line that went with Tribe 3 of Nohasa, Atlantis, which is now what we call Bermuda. What's left of it is called Bermuda. The Celtacs were tribe 11, Monty Grail line, and they were the ones that we call the Irish now. And the whole history of Ireland, we went through that a bit, where they say, oh, there were these like wild blue raider races that went and like conquered territories. These weren't the Irish people. These were the Leviathan raiders that came in and took over the race identity of the Irish people. The same thing happened here. The Italic people were not originally warriors. They were turned into warriors and trying to defend themselves from what was happening here. But before we had the buildings that we saw, like today at Knossos, the big palaces and those kind of things, there were civilizations here that for a while were actually peaceful. Because for a while, Ionia became a haven where we were being chased out of other areas where gate conquests were going down for Gate 11 up in England and for various other gates, Gate 10 down in Iran, and there's a bunch of questing going on for Gate 8, I believe, in China. And so there's a lot of everybody run this way, because the Leviathans are going that way, right? And we were able to set up small pockets, and this is why we were able to survive to the point where we can have an indigo grail line on the planet right now, and where we can have an angelic human grail line left, is because we would do it in small pockets, and they'd be scattered all over the place. So there wasn't any one big concentration of them where somebody could come in and wipe out the whole bunch. There would still be somebody left to carry the race line. This is one of the places that in fact, where that temple, the Knossos Palace, sits, was a place that we had one of those small civilizations where, for a time, and it was funny, I was getting memories on that one when I was sitting there. It was like, oh, neat. Yeah, we came there knowing we were going to probably become extinct, but as long as a few of us could go and escape, it would be fine, and that was all part of the divine plan. At least you know where you fit in the universe. But there was something called the Knights of Knossos. The Knights of Knossos were the raider races that came in here. And it's very interesting because they're still going strong. And so are the ones they used to fight with, which are the Knights Templar. The Knights of Knossos were draconian. They were of the Leviathan races they're from Atlantean period, who were working for the Omicron draconian races, which were the ones from Orion, that were against the Anunnaki races. For ages, but ever since the original thing 250 billion years ago with the Lyran Elohim Wars, where the Anu Elohim wanted to destroy the fallen Seraphi Seraphim, which were the Draconians came out of. They didn't like the Dragon Moth guys. So they still don't. And what you had was the Knights Templar were spreading all over the place. They were raiding the angelic human and grail lines, and they were forcing interbreeding between their own races to produce lines of children that progressively had more and more of the grail line coding. The grail line DNA coding is what went with the planetary grids. Humans and angelic humans and the indigo children have DNA that is mathematically coded to the mathematical scalar template of the planetary shields. We could run the Templar. We were given that as a gift because we were the ones appointed as the guardians of this planet. And the Leviathan races, if they were ever going to take over this planet and actually be able to run the stargates, they had to be able to access the stargates, the security coding in the stargates. They needed the gene code. So they couldn't just come and flatten everybody and take it. They had to progressively infiltrate from within and build up a master race that would hold because it raided so many. They had to get every one of the 12 tribes of angelic humans. They had to pick up the coding of every one of them, at least to some degree, for them to be able to fully access the grids enough to completely take them away, to completely reverse them, to take them into the phantom matrix. So it's been a long and progressive, what we've watched in our history is a long and progressive infiltration in the most personal of ways. I mean, they would literally send their raider races into a culture or a town, and they would kill most of the men, and they would rape the women, and they would keep them only until they gave birth, then they would kill them too. And they would keep the children and have their own women raise them. And there was this is just a horrible way to be. They wonder why we don't want them to, keep doing what they're doing. They wonder why the council will never approve of the way they want to run their free will matrix. So in this particular time period, where after the flood, 9558 BC, between that period and 3470 BC, there was a lot of wacky things happening. You had a whole bunch of Leviathan races that decided to follow the agenda of the Draconian races, because the Draconian races had started to incarnate into the Leviathan form, which was primarily an Anunnaki form when it started in Atlantis. They'd started to incarnate into that. So now you had Draconian Leviathans and you had Anunnaki Leviathans, and they didn't like each other. Okay, so you had progressively, the Anunnaki were the dominant ones. They have 11 strands of what we call reversed DNA template, as opposed to the 10 strands of the Draconian. So they have a little bit of genetic one-up on you kind of thing. They where Draconians would approach things with just go in your face and dominate you. I'm going to take that. Right? The other ones went, hi, how are you? Wouldn't you like to give that to me? Whole difference. There's a sophistication, a manipulation with that extra 11, that 11th reverse strand. So there was a conquest going on, and the Draconian races ended up with their strongholds in Rome. And this is really where the Anunnaki tried to come and take that away. Because this is where the gods became very useful. The Roman and Greek gods, they kind of popped up around the same periods of time. And there were periods of time when, because the Anunnaki were so busy taking over Egypt and taking over other places, like all those wonderful temples over there in Egypt, they're very much Anunnaki architecture. The whole thing that we call the pharaonic line, there was maybe out of all of those pharaohs, 5 that were actually human or indigo. The rest of them it was a takeover, part of the takeover agenda. And because the Anunnaki Leviathan races were doing so well in their territorial conquest, it was really upsetting the Draconian races. So they tried really, really hard to create their own, go forth and conquer and breed and make many more, right? And kill those guys while you're at it. So what we ended up with was much of the Draconian ones started to come this way, where the others were busy, raiding other areas. They came over into Greece and into Italy and Ionia. They took over Ionia. And that was like the last place where all the indigos and the angelic humans were hiding. Like, uh-oh, here they come. Well, it could be worse. Could be the Anunnaki, right? Because they were more sophisticated as far as, they were a force to contend with because they were smart and they were quick and they were sharp, where there's a little dullness in the Draconian consciousness that was a little easier to deal with. Pretty straightforward. Yeah, it has a knife. It'll try to stab you. I won't try to give you the knife and then shoot you from behind. But just more of the Anunnaki style. So anyway, the civilizations of the Grail Lines that were, holed up in little areas in the islands, in the Greek islands and things, they knew the time would come because they knew what was happening. They still had the Atlantean records. It was at the point where, even when Minoan civilization started, and it really started about 4,500 BC. It was not, as far as what they call the Minoans now, there was stuff here before that. There were people here before that. There were Ionians here before the Grail Lines came in, and then you had the Grail Lines came in. So you really have like Celtic Druidic Greeks, and you have Ionian Italic Greeks, and these were the original, some of the original people. Many of the people here, they don't know their history anymore, but they are them. They still carry that original gene code. Many of them were from Rome as well, because Rome, there wasn't a division between Greece and Italy and in those days, but it happened because of the politics. That was all Ionia. Ionia actually stretched all over the place. It stretched up into, up past the Boot and over. I'd have to get a map to show the map. Now, these are happening around the same time, and they're headed by somebody called Thoth. The Egyptian god Thoth. Well, he was also Hermes Trismegistus. I have a hard time saying that one. In the Greek mythologies. Is it Roman? He was Mercury in Roman. Yeah, he was known, that was associated with the Mercury god in Roman mythology, but Hermes Trismegistus. This was Thoth. Thoth, my old buddy. I say that because I know the being. The being is an immortal, and not because he has a Christos imprint anymore. He was appointed as, he had joined Emerald Covenant. He was originally of the fallen races, did bioregenesis, got this close to becoming a Christed being again, and was put in charge of a whole bunch of the Leviathan races in the bioregenesis experiment. He was one of the first. He and Enoch were two beings that were entrusted to guide the Leviathan races back into their evolution. They were the ones appointed to oversee 2 different divisions of the Leviathan race experiment, and both of them at different times fell. And when Thoth fell in Atlantis, he took his privilege, and this happened in 22,326 BC. That's when he left the Emerald Covenant, and he took his Leviathan races and decided they would create a master race here, and that they would take over, and that's been going on ever since. So when you think, hear of the names like, Hermes Trismegistus, this was Thoth. When you hear about the guy, what is it, Quetzalcoatl, the one I can't pronounce, Quetzalcoatl, in the Mayan legends, this was the same person, and it was the same collective. The Thoth, the Thoth paradigm comes out of a place called Nibiru. Nibiru used to be our 12th planet, and it isn't anymore because it got sucked into Phantom, and now it just comes through on a very strange orbit. We're going to talk about this in the Metatronic Science things because we're going to have a little visit by a part of Nibiru that we really don't need to have a visit by. This is all coming to a head in this time period. But when we go back into the Greek culture and what it's evolved from, where these gods evolved from, when the Draconians got a stronghold over here and in certain other places, they were also in South America because there are stargates over there. You have in Peru, you have Stargate, you have 5 and 7. Yeah, 5 and 7 are over there. And over here in Italy, you have Q-Site 5, which is Inner Earth Stargate 5. All right, so basically you have 12 stargates that are our stargates, and then 12 points called Q-Sites that connect to our stargates, but also directly to the Inner Earth stargates. And that's why when I said Italy with Tribe 5 would be settled wherever Gate 5 and Q-Site 5 was. All right, so this is how that works. It's in Voyages, if anybody hasn't read that. How the tribes were seated in relation to their stargates and to their Q-Sites was already in there. But anyway, there were these progressive, all right, the Dracs got this far, the Anunnaki were going to follow them. It started in Egypt, and this is why there's influences. You can trace the Egyptian influence over into Mayan culture, over into Incan culture, and those kind of things, and particularly Aztec. Aztecs were ones that got taken over by the Dracs, and the Mayas were ones that ended up getting taken over by the Anunnaki. So, and they were always like competing with each other. It happened here too, where you had certain groups of the original Italic people were taken over by the Dracs, and for a long time it became very Drac here, very draconian agenda. And the draconian agenda was about letting the dragon moth people from Orion, they would be the creator gods of the planet and kick anybody else out that didn't like it, that kind of thing. And the Anunnaki had their own version of that, they wanted to do that. But when the gods of Atlantis were brought back, they were brought back into Egypt, they were brought back into Mayan culture in South America, they were brought back into certain areas of China, and they were brought back here. And here they were brought back in the, let's say, clothing of the Greek and Roman mythologies, where the stories were told. And the stories were almost like tongue-in-cheek, some of them. I mean, they would tell the history, we'll put it that way. Isn't that funny? I can just see these guys, right. Now, there were history records that verified all of this stuff in its real context. After 9558 BC, those history records, most of them, were destroyed. They were destroyed on purpose because we had a big ET house cleaning. There were ships that came down after that flood, and those ships would use certain beams. They're called, which kind do they use? I'm just trying to see if they were, they call them hydrophonic. All right, there's a new kind. Hydrophonic beam ships. All right, and I'm just getting this in. They're actually giving me more detail on the technology. I knew it was, they would use the sonics, but this is a particular kind. It's a beam that if it's a wave, like a particle wave type thing, and if you beam it at an object, you can hit a frequency with it where it literally demanifests it. They wiped out a lot of what used to be ruins. I mean, I think ruins are here now. You should have seen what was here from Atlantis. Atlantis had beautiful, massive stone, buildings and temples that put these guys that are left to shame. But they got rid of anything that wasn't of their own. They got rid of everything that pertained to the history of the angelic humans. And they got rid of everything that pertained to anything that didn't fit into their stories. Because they were writing a storybook. They were going to write a storybook to teach a race of children how to be very good, subservient little children forever. What had happened in 3,470 BC? While you had civilizations here, you had this draconian and Anunnaki thing happening and rail lines trying to hide here and there and everywhere. There is, let's say, the second the second foot fell. If the first foot was 25,500 BC when they originally started to come in and mess with the DNA through the planetary grids, the next foot came in, big one, came in 3,470 BC. And this made a big difference. This is where it was like blank slate technology test one. All right? Meaning they created alterations in the planetary grids again, using the Nibiru Endowed crystal grid system, which is a sonic wave distribution system that can direct the electromagnetics of the planet. They crashed the grids again. This was in the Tower of Babel incident. We talk about that in the Voyagers book a bit. And they completely scrambled the languages at that point. Now, if you mess with the magnetic grids here, and science here is just starting to figure this out, that DNA is very sensitive to magnetic fields. So, if you mess with the magnetic field on a planet, you will alter the DNA. And the Anunnaki knew that. They went for a clean sweep in 3,470 BC. They'd done the flood before that, but people were still remembering enough of the history. They still had oral tradition. They were speaking the Maharata texts, which were the books from the CDD plates, the founders' teachings. There were still enough Grail lines left that we were teaching our children, and they were teaching their children. They were spreading the word that this is what is really going on here. And it was starting to create rebellion in the Leviathan races, where they didn't want to follow their old creator gods that they had to, like, worship things for and, like, kill things and, do that kind of thing. They were starting to listen. The Leviathan races were starting to listen to the Grey Line races and saying, yeah, I don't like living this way. I don't like having to, cut heads off sheep all the time to make them happy. We don't have to do that? It's like, no. Oh, okay. So they were starting to listen and wanting to be re-educated. They were wanting to re-enter the Emerald Covenant. And this quite upset the fallen angelic races. Wait a minute, they're our soldiers. You can't have them. They orchestrated the Tower of Babel incident in order to, they almost caused pole shift, but didn't quite. It nudged it a little bit. I believe that's where we picked up our wobble from, the combination between that and the one from, where they did the flood. Before that, we got our wobble on our axis from that. But they created the mutation in the DNA by blocking certain things in the planetary grids. I'll explain this one really quick. There's something called vector codes in the DNA template, and there's supposed to be 12 vector codes in the whole DNA template, but they repeat in sets of 12, but they're the same, 12 particular codes, each one for each of 12 dimensions. Right? The first thing they did in 25,500 BC was block out of the planetary grids 9 through 12. So it shut off that part of the DNA. What they did in 3,470 BC was they ran a polarization program through the planetary grids, which shut off another half, but first they polarized it. So you had 8 left. They polarized those and shut off half of each, leaving what's called a base 4 genetic alphabet. When that happened, it completely fragmented our memory banks. People literally woke up and didn't know who they were and didn't know how to speak anymore. They couldn't speak. They didn't have the sequencing for the languages that they used, the Atlantean languages. So they were ripe for the picking. They were ripe to come in and reteach them. The gods would come in and teach them new languages. And they would teach them new ways of being and how to worship them again. And that's what they did. It was planetary. It wasn't just here in Greece. It wasn't just in Egypt. It happened across the board. And this is where the indigos and the Great Lines ended up going down too. Our DNA was messed up too. We didn't remember either. So it was very easy. At this point, you have a bunch of people who used to be very intelligent that haven't a clue anymore. It's like they're all on Thorazine, walking around, and they don't even know how to talk anymore. They can't even talk to themselves, forget to talk to each other. Then progressively there was an infiltration. And at first it was very much run by visitation by them. Not so much spaceships, because it was agreed in Atlantis that if we get them to this point and we can get them under this much control, I don't want to teach them about spaceships and things. We'll be the gods that come down from the clouds, the heaven stories, this kind of stuff. They were going to fill out the realities. Now, we had teachings forever about the God worlds and those things, about those other matter density levels and those other higher spaces that a being can live in. They were part of our teachings, the original angelic human teachings. So they took the best of our teachings as far as the framework And they used it in filled in characters. And they created gods, and then they had their counter ones that created gods like Jehovah, and then you had there was all of these gods that we've come up with and that we've been raised with are, in truth, can be traced back to the names of very specific race lines of either Anunnaki or Draconian nature. They weren't gods, because there's one thing that's, that's amazing. People say, oh, well, you're against God. No. What we're against are false gods that run around saying people are supposed to be subservient. One thing the Emerald teachings never, ever, ever taught. You're not supposed to grovel. They can't be undone once it's done. So the races, for this planet, as recently as Atlantis, had the ability to still bioregenesis out. Thoth made a choice. There was a very, very bad choice. Thoth was an Anunnaki who almost fully got back his Christos pattern. He made it to 11.5. And then he made a choice to join with the Weesadex, to lead his people into the Weesadex. And there was a small collective of Thothian high priests that knew. And the rest of the middle and low priests, the Templar Melchizedeks, weren't told what they were getting initiated into. They begin the fire sword initiations. The fire sword initiations, the flaming blue sword of Archangel Michael, which is a Nephilim collective of the Weesadex. It was a type of initiation where you'd go into a temple and you would say, yes, I give permission to have this immortal frequency run through me, without knowing what you were getting yourself into. And you'd get zapped. You'd get zapped with frequency that would be able to overpower. You're not quite, the Leviathan races weren't activated to 12th strand yet. They were just getting their 5th strand imprint when this mess began. And it took their 5th strand and it recoded it to the Metatronic pattern. And they would get juiced on that. You could get some real frequency flowing through you on that. But it was frequency that progressively took away the ability to ever regenerate the Christos pattern. Frequency that started a race line. It started the Leviathan race line in full as a master's invader race that was intended, and they were told to go forth and multiply. They were sent in to intermingle with our root races and our cloister races whenever possible, to send the Metatronic DNA distortion in to all of the race lines. So by the time the stellar activation cycle of this period came, everyone would have critical mass of Metatronic distortion. So we would help the planet to pull itself in to reversal, because so many of us were spinning unreversed Merkaba on the Metatronic pattern. Thoth went over in 22,326 BC. They wanted to finish it off then, but they weren't able to do it then because the founders' races blocked the stargates from activating any further. So they couldn't run Archangel Michael's flaming blue sword down through this. Because what this flaming blue sword is, it's that D7 plus D6 artificial D13 current that runs down the center pillar. It runs down our gate line. And it crosses over at the 6 points. Now, there's another diagram. We have those run off too, Lou? There's another diagram. This one's going to be hard to read because I didn't have time to white out a bunch of stuff we don't need. This was made from the one you've seen in the Dance For program that you're probably still trying to figure out what that means. You should be able to, basically, if I point to things, you should be able to understand this. It would have been easier if we could have had, transparencies on this, but I'll just use this for now to show where the flaming blue sword of Archangel Michael comes through. Our grid's running basically where my 3 fingers are in the front there. One, I'm trying to, that one's running down this way. This one's the phantom axis. This one's running down this way. And this is our natural axis. I'll explain it if people over there can't see? Is there anybody, did somebody say they couldn't see? Okay. So these are basically the three axes. When we have the other diagram, when you see this one over here on the other diagram, this shows our main axis and then the two little axes coming in over there. There. Yeah, there's ours. There's the phantom. And there's the Wiesadack. Now, they link through the 6 gates. This is the 666. Phantom gate 6, our gate 6, and Wiesadack gate 6. That is the crossbar, or the cross, of the flaming blue cross of Archangel Michael. That's where the frequency fully comes through and is able to go on the vertical and run from their matrices completely down ours, braiding this one and this one together through ours, and then pulling the whole thing over into that axis. It literally, through the hearts that were shown on this diagram, those hearts are like braiding machines. They're crystalline technologies that take two sets of frequencies and braid them together. And when the final heart starts beating, when that one is activated, the one down here at D1.5, that one will set in motion the braiding. Now, what we're facing in our contemporary times is the activation of the things called the turnstiles on the planetary level and on the galactic level that set in motion the coming of Archangel Michael's flaming blue sword. The trickery that's being done right now to people is one of the things that makes me, I still can get angry. I can understand their desperation. I can understand even how you can get so lost that you can actually blame someone else for your hologram, even though it's your own darn fault. But there's a trickery being done right now through several very, very popular New Age movements. They're taking people into initiations. Heck, Archangel Michael even has all sorts of centers set up. There's one in Sedona, Arizona that has this wonderful chamber to sit in so you can get zapped with the divine frequencies. They're doing the fire sword initiations again. What this does is activate in the human body the 2/3, part of which 1/3 is now dormant, like it's not turned on yet, but it's ready to go, of the Metatronic programming. It's the activation of the Metatronic programming. Once that programming starts to run through the body, our Metatronic shadow begins to take over the body. The Metatronic shadow is conveniently fused to a consciousness collective in the Wiesadack matrix. We've got baggage. We have a shadow that was our own consciousness that was taken and put into reversal, that's been hanging out in our field. This is where we get the polarity within ourselves. One says yes, the other says no. One says I want to eat, the other says no, I don't. The one says I'm going to be good, the other says no, I'm going to be bad. You know? Our duality, our chemical duality. Especially it's seen in exaggerated form with bipolar disorders, chemical bipolar disorders that people are suffering from. These are created because of the Metatronic programming that's partially imbued into our DNA templates and imbued into our Merkaba fields. Now we can override this until we have less than 30% of our templates left. The fire sword initiations that are being done right now among certain collectives, and it's not just the ones that use the name Archangel Michael. There's a lot of cover names, any of them that use Metatronic science or Yahweh or any of those type of words. Any of them. They very often use the name Melchizedek, but they don't use the name Cloister. They will, though. Just wait. Yeah, be prepared. There's going to be an Azurite Templar style, Templar Melchizedek style. They'll have no choice because we're exposing them to the point where they have to look like they're one of us in order to get anybody. You know, I mean, it's not yet. There's a lot of people who very much hate the messenger here. And you know, that's too bad. They can make that choice if they want to. We have no need. The founders have no need. Source has no need to recruit anybody. But we made a promise a long time ago that regardless of how bad it got here, we would bring the truth back. And if nobody wanted to hear it, that was okay. They don't have to, because we respect the free will of all of the beings on this planet and every other one. But the Weesadeks and the ones who got involved with them, and many of the ones from the Phantom Matrix, don't respect free will at all. They're into dominion. They'll use trickery or outright aggression, whatever's necessary. Trickery is easier. It's easier to get somebody to go along with you than to force them to. If things were allowed to continue without a voice, a still small voice, with much less people than the other real popular movements that are on the circuit, you know, the international circuit really, but especially in the States, it would have been a breaking of our promise if we didn't come to at least set this information. It's like, okay, well, you guys can like follow that, but here's this, take it or leave it. The free will is being honored, even if they hate us for it. And because of that, it's worth it. That's why we come and speak about it. I have nothing against the people, neither do the founders, that are into Archangel Michael, that are into Enoch, that are into the Bible, that are into this, that, and the other thing. Because at this point, all of the dogmas have been positioned since Atlantis to serve one of two agendas, neither of them the Christos agenda. There are two things happening, and there's a final conflict battle brewing. And it's not between the founders' races or the guardians' races. It's between the races of Phantom Matrix, who do not want to be assimilated, and the races of the Weesadek Matrix, the Metatronic Matrix, who want to assimilate them and us. Right now, there's a battle being staged. It was a battle that was really scripted out in Atlantis. We were kind of considered, the guardian races were kind of considered like they'd be hopeless by then. You know, we wouldn't be able to do anything, so they didn't even really worry about us. We've caused them a bit of concern ever since we got the D12 anchored here, because now they're not going to be able to just do a smooth sweep through and take the whole matrix down. But there is a battle brewing, and we're beginning to see it. When we got when we were given the information for Voyager's Volume 2, Second Edition, some things were explained to us about the contemporary drama, about the 9/11 event, September 11th event, how that was a trigger event that was meant to set in motion a certain number of other actions to follow, that all are supposed to culminate into a fulfillment of a script that was made in Atlantis, this script being a World War III drama, through which a certain climate would be created that would be much more open for, let's say, visitors from the skies that came in as angels to tell us we can't destroy each other anymore. There's a presence needed on planet to run the HARP machines in the ways that our governments don't know how to run the HARP machines. We were given the technologies for the HARP machine and a few others like it because they plug in to this. They help download the Metatronic frequencies. We're preparing for a very interesting set of events. There's something that will be released for tomorrow. I don't know it. Az doesn't know it. They didn't give it to us yet. It's on security release. Something has to do with May of 2003. There's a big charge around that time period. That's when certain groups of the ascended masters from the immortal, as opposed to eternal, life matrix, from the Weesadeks, are forecasting the beginning of the fourth battle of Armageddon, 4 out of 7. The fourth being the one that's supposed to begin manifesting on Earth in 3D. We are going to be given information tomorrow, and we'll all get it about the same time. I might get it, as I might have it like half hour before you guys do. I don't know what it is, but I know it's probably pretty intense if they've not even given us a clue. There's some other things they did give us a clue about that we'll talk about tomorrow when we talk about the beast. Now this is part of the beast. This is what the beast is meant to drag us into and to finalize this creation, this Antichristos cube matrix, the Metatronic cube matrix. September of 2000, when the United Intruder Resistance was formed, because we got D12 here and they weren't expecting it, and it's the only way they could get anywhere was by joining forces. you now have what were three distinct scripts that were pretty straightforward as far as their events, blended into one, where they're taking a piece of this one and a piece of that one, and they're literally combining three programs that were programmed into the radio body of this planet. Each one of them programmed their own set of script into what digital hologram they would see here. Now it's being blended into one large script that has elements of the three. So it's harder to track as far as exactly what's supposed to, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. But all of them had in common the final conflict battle, and all of them had in common the getting rid of undesirable elements of the population. Part of this has to do with the frequency fence that is progressively being built. That started in, was it September last year? It was September last year, wasn't it, when they started that? They let us know that, yeah, in fact, it was right before, the week before the 9/11 thing happened. They let us know that steps had been made, that the Illuminati agenda was advancing now, and they were beginning their frequency fence, and within a week we had the 9/11 disaster and all that, and it was a trigger event to kind of mark the beginning. We're in the middle, or the beginning of the end, actually, of a drama that could get very, very weird as we move forward. We can expect, to some level, war. Now, what countries are going to be involved to what degree remains to be seen. The Middle East is going to keep going. It may die down a little. See, there's a way of playing with people, the masses, where it's almost like you cry wolf enough times, and then when the real thing is happening, nobody bothers to pay attention until it's too late, because they heard it so many times. They're desensitizing us right now to where we get to a point where we don't care anymore, because, oh yeah, they're fighting again, yeah, whatever. There's going to be a point where we'll see some of this. We'll see certain things flaring up in one area, and our attention will be there and be worried, oh, is it going to go to where? Oh, no, didn't. See, they calmed down and they're not fighting anymore. Then it'll pop up over here. But eventually, in the next couple of years, probably it may be as early as 2003. I do believe somewhere around May of 2003, the next trigger event is going to be set in motion, and I believe that's probably going to be the United States and whatever it can get in its coalition going after Iraq. And that's going to set off some interesting things in the Muslim nations. Right now you're watching certain forces. I mean, now we have Christians and Protestants and Jewish people and Muslims and all these. If you look at countries, most of them are still at their core defined by a creed. Muslim forces being motivated to follow the script, to do their part in beginning the war. But you're also watching the Israelis be impulsed to do the same, and you are watching the other governments being impulsed to do the same. They're using ethics. They're using our belief systems, the things that are most dear to us, to motivate us to allow for horrendous actions to be permitted, because we're being shown that there's not another choice. All of the things that we're seeing right now are part of the script that was electronically programmed into the planetary grids and the planetary radio body beginning in 25,500 BC. In 22,326 BC, it was all supposed to be done and over with, but the Guardian races intervened and they stopped the stellar activation cycle. It caused a partial pole shift, and it caused some cataclysmic earth changes on a smaller scale than have been before. But if that hadn't been done, none of us would be here to talk about it, and the whole place would have gone into the black hole matrix. At this point, we're doing better than we were in 22,326 BC. We could have been doing better than that if the Anunnaki had kept their agreements, but, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Doesn't do you much good. We are where we are. We're in Plan B, and Plan B has to do with becoming rapidly aware of the larger drama. We were getting aware of the big picture. Well, now we're getting aware of the huge picture, of where the big picture fits into. The huge picture, at its core, has Metatronics. When you hear the word Metatronics, it goes directly in hand with the Wesedex matrix. It is their mathematical coding, their hybridized, twisted mathematical coding, where they literally took creation mechanics and took portions of them. Like I explained before, if you had 12 subfrequency bands in each dimension, and you took half of this one, half of that one, half of that one, and knocked out 9 through 12, you could have a base 8 system that you could plug the other parts in and create an anomaly of physics that would allow for a frequency drawing current, or a sucking current, where it could tap into other matrices and draw frequency in and literally hold together a universal structure or a body structure that was artificially sustained. It's through an artificial light-sound pattern. Artificial in the sense that it was not part of the organic divine blueprint, and it's operating on twisted mechanics. We're dealing with this now. Our radial body of the planet was altered through this process, along with a lot of other places. Our physical bodies are carrying what is considered the shadow of Gaia. There's a reason it's called Gaia. It's because these things, the Metatronic coding that began to be filtered into our system, didn't begin with Earth or with this last period of Atlantean history. It began way before. It began during the Gaian Wars that we talked about, the Iran-Gaian Wars 570 million years ago. During those wars, they were an absolute mess. It was one of those, if you're going to keep a chalkboard, a scoreboard, the Weesadex got a big point on that one because they took out the Azurite races. The Azurite races were the original guardian races of this time matrix. It was because of that that the Orifeme guardian races had to be created, because, meaning taking out the guardian races, the Azurites, they literally pulled a portion of Gaia, which was Earth's density 3 counterpart, and a number of other systems, particularly in Andromeda and Procyon and some of the Sirius systems. Sirius C went down. There used to be a Sirius C. We have Sirius A and Sirius B right now. There used to be a Sirius C. They were all dragged down into the Weesadec matrix. The Azurite races had come into the Phantom matrix. They had been sent into Phantom to try to help the Odedicron races to get out, because they were the ones that got stuck, the reptilian ones that got stuck, and they weren't even part of the drama intentionally. We had tried to get them out and to get any of the other races that wanted to do Emerald Covenant out of the Phantom matrix when the Weesadex broke through. When the portions of Gaia and some of the other surrounding systems went down, large numbers, huge numbers of the Azurite races were taken down into the Weesadec matrix. Some of them got stuck in Phantom because the full Phantom matrix didn't go down, only portions of it did. The Azurite races that were sucked into Weesadec matrix were, once they were recoded to the Metatronic pattern, you can't get them out. So there were a large number of the original Ascended Master collectives that created the Azurites in this rescue mission, that there are fallen entities all over the place, because large numbers of them had gone down into the Weesadec matrix and were recoded. They became what was called the Azazel, which were a very dark race, and they look like the Azurite races as far as their physicality, because they took the Azurite race genetic imprint and they assimilated it and put the Weesadec consciousness in it. So we have a Gaian shadow in the sense that even from the period of the Azurite races, now what was created after the Azurite races 570 million years ago, about 568 million years ago, the Orifeme were created. They took the Azurite pattern, the original Azurite gene code, and combined it and amplified it with more of the founders, Christos races imprint. But by taking on the Azurite gene code, we adopted a portion of the pattern that had a vulnerability to be intercepted through the Weesadec matrix. This was done in part to allow healing to occur for the Azurite races that got stuck in Phantom, that hadn't completely fallen yet, because by bringing the Orifeme in with that coding, we held their potential for bioregenesis, which means if you take an Orifeme and you take an Azurite from Phantom Matrix and you combine them naturally, you have them marry each other, and they have a baby. That baby is the beginning of a generation that is an advancement genetically compared to the fallen one before. And if you keep doing that, you build a race line. You can build a race line back up to what it originally was. So we took on, even in the creation of the Orifeme that the humans here came out of, we took on a commitment to assist the fallen races, particularly the guardian races that had fallen into the Phantom Matrix. Right now, that genetic propensity that we've had has been abused to a very large degree. When it comes to our recent history in the third seeding of the humans on this planet, that genetic propensity has been amplified as far as crossing it with more of the Metatronic races. So each of us now carry a genetic legacy that is partly phantom, which is a reversed coding. It's partly Wisadek, which is a beyond the point of return reversed Metatronic coding, and the part of us that can get us through, which is the original divine blueprint that holds the imprint for everything in this time matrix. Angelic humans have the imprint of everything from D12 to D1 in this time matrix. The indigos, 1 and 2s, have everything from D15 on down for the indigo 2s, and everything from the primal sound fields on down, or the higher God worlds on down, for the indigo 1s that have 48 strands. On a personal level and on a race level right now, what we're dealing with is a shadow side that is genetically real, and it's the part of ourselves that's either going, what happens with our shadow is either going to make it or break it as far as which path of future evolution we end up on. There are some people that don't have 30% of their DNA templates, their original DNA templates left. They have been Metatronicked. They've had the fire sword initiations, which began in this particular line, in this particular seeding of the humans. It began in the Atlantean period after 25,500 BC, where certain groups, and these were begun with the Drac races, because the Dracs had actually gone over first. The Omicron Draconian races and the Leviathan races down here had gone over into joining, some of them had gone over into joining the Wisadeks first. So it began as a Draconian initiation. Then in 22,326 BC, it was actually 340 BC, right before that stellar activation cycle, when Thoth led his Leviathan races into Wisadek contracts. That's when more and more races were subjected to the fire sword initiations, and then those races were forcibly combined with angelic human and indigo races, so the virus spread. So we all have, to some degree, the Metatronic coding. The Metatronic coding means that we are susceptible to frequency fence. Frequency fence is beaming through the planetary grid something that doesn't belong there, that can alter the way the brain and the body works in relation to consciousness. A frequency fence is like an interference pattern. If you think about electronics, what do they call those things? The jamming frequencies? You know, if you're sending like a radio frequency, there's another type of frequency you can send through that to break it up, so the transmission doesn't get to the other end the way it's supposed to. Yeah, scrambler. Yeah. And just like when you try to get the cable picture but you haven't paid for those channels, you know, right? You pay for it, you get the, you can get the frequency through, but if not, there is a frequency fence that scrambles the coding. Well, the frequency fences that they use on a planetary level scramble the coding, the communication between the higher parts of your own identity and your 3D parts here. They scramble the operation between the brain and the emotions and the body and the spirit. Because we've all been subjected to some degree of Metatronic influence, we all have a susceptibility to that, even indigos. We all carry that with us. What it's going to culminate into is a path of the 3 paths of Genesis that are mentioned in the itinerary. There are 3 paths of evolution, and only 3, because we are now in the heroic probability, which means the divine blueprint is being reset. That means all sorts of other things are going to adjust themselves accordingly. There are 3 paths that the human beings, and not just the human beings, but the plants and the animals and the minerals and the things you don't see that are 2-dimensional, the elementals and things like that, that are going to evolve into. We have the path of Aramatena, which is the original D12 divine blueprint path of this time matrix. That is the path of freedom. It is a path of the Emerald Covenant. There is the path of Arimathea, which is the path of Metatron. That is a permanent path, because once the races make that shift, and it's like right now we have 2/3 of ourselves metatronically coded, but 1/3 is shut off. If you can recode back to its normal pattern, that half of that 2/3, so you only have 1/3 Metatronic and you're back to 2/3 of your normal template, you'll be able to not have your shadow drag you into Metatronic alignment. But there are races now, there are beings on this planet, people we know, people we care about, animals we know and animals we care about, plants we like and plants we care about, that have too much of the Metatronic coding to undo in the short period of time we have left before the separation occurs. There's one path left for people who have at least 30%, or beings, or things, or planetary grids that have 30% of the original divine blueprint, is the path of the host, which means they won't be able to hold enough frequency in their bodies to make the full plug-in to their own divine blueprint. There are certain guardian races, Rishi and Ascended Master collectives, that are assisting. They're literally sending frequency alternatives. They will be hosted into other time matrices that they're more compatible with, time matrices that will preserve them from being taken in to the Wissadet matrix. This is going to look very strange as the three paths of Genesis come upon us. And they're Genesis because they are literally new species are being born now before our eyes through this change. The original species of the angelic human and the indigo will be regenerated. It will be regenerated, but it's new compared to what it was, because now it also has portions of the Metatronic coding, which means it has abilities to heal certain types of beings that are in a phantom type situation that aren't fully gone. So there have been things we've learned and things we've acquired as humans and as indigos that are different from our original creation. It's an expanded creation compared to what we originally started as. There's a new creation, and this is what the United Resistance, the United Intruder Resistance, and the Wissadeks, their whole focus is on. They are creating a new master race right now. They are creating it here on Earth. The people that are hijacked into full Metatronic coding will be a new race. They will be a race that has what used to be indigo children turned into magentas. The magenta races, are going to be the highest coded fallen races that have ever lived, because they have the indigo coding of, they have 12 strands. And they can go into what they're trying to do with the indigo races, turning them into magentas, is take them from a 11.5 strand reverse potential into a 12.5 strand reverse potential. Divine blueprints at D12. They are creating their own divine blueprint for their matrix, a reversed one, an antichristos one. There are people that many of us will know, people that hang out with Archangel Michael and a few other very popular speakers, some of the people who follow traditional religions that since Atlantis have been distorted into something they weren't intended to be. These are the new bodies that the Metatron people are going to use to create their master race. However, a lot of the people in those bodies were the people that incarnated out of those matrices in the Phantom Matrix to begin with. So it's not as horrendous a level of victimization as one might think on the surface. On this planet, there's been a continual and progressive infiltration of the fallen angelic races from Phantom Matrix, and after Wissadet got involved, also from Wissadet Matrix. In the Atlantean period, the Leviathan races, which were originally a hybrid, I'll talk about them briefly in a minute, because some of you may not know what I'm referring to when I talk about Leviathan, and I will go over this page quickly, creation of the Leviathan. But in the Atlantean period, anyway, there was a huge influx of both fallen angelic souls from the Phantom Matrix and from the Wissadet Matrix, where a huge number of the people on the planet right now weren't originally human to begin with. Right now, they're wearing the mask of a human body, just like we are. What we call a human body right now is a mutation. This isn't what a human body looks like. A human body is much taller. It's much lighter in density. It's about, three times less dense than what we are right now. It has abilities of all sorts of things, like levitation and appearing and disappearing, Merkaba, and all sorts of things. What we've all been living is a shared mutation. That mutation was done, we have what's called the base 4 mutation. where we have 4 nucleotide bases that make up our base DNA. And this applies to plants and everything else on this planet. In the Atlantean period, between 25,500 BC and 9,558 BC, this mutation into an all-oneness, where we all wore the same faces so we couldn't tell each other apart anymore, that's when it was orchestrated. It was orchestrated for the purpose of meeting at this time, where you wouldn't be able to tell a human from a non-human. And we would all think, and we would all have our memories wiped to the point where we didn't know where we came from. We had different ideas that were fed to us from somewhere that ended up in books that, became things that people killed each other over, that kind of thing. So when we begin to see some of the changes that are going down, and we begin to realize that there are 3 distinct paths that people are falling into. What is 3? All right. The path of, that's the 3rd one. Arimatena, Arimathea, and path of the host, which is get you out of here in whatever way possible, because you can't make it into the path of Arimathea. We've got to get you somewhere so you don't go into the other path, basically. That's what that is. And that will be, there will be a lot of diversity in that. It will depend. All of us have different stellar coding. We have the same imprint as far as, human, or some of us that aren't human. Some of us came from other places, and we really are, we're sharing the human mutation, or the Homo sapien mutation, let's say. But we're not even, human. Some of us are other types of guardian races that we're working with the guardians of this time matrix. There's Syrians here, there's Lyrans here, there's all sorts of beings here that might not have even come fully through the Orifeme imprint, but they were able to pick it up in Atlantis, because it was a free-for-all in Atlantis with the genetic stuff they were doing, so that can be used to advantage as well. It'll be interesting as we progress in our personal development, because we'll find out who and what we are. Like we'll find out, I guess I didn't do an Orifeme thing. Gosh, I'm like blue. I'm a Syrian blue. Yeah, that's an Azurite. Some people are Azurites. If you see yourself, if you start to get images of a blue Syrian as your Syrian self, where you're very tall and thin, and many of you have no hair, but have very fine feathers. But very human-like faces, and very elegant beings. Some will even have wings. Some of them have, they're crossed with more of the Seraphi races, and they have feathered wings and things. Others are just blue hominids. Kind of like that Farscape show. The Farscape show, they have the blue lady. Yeah, well, we love watching that for her, because she's the way she looks is very, very close to certain races that came out of the Azurites. One of them are the Maharaji. The Maharaji are blue humans that are right now the guardian races of Sirius B, and they're also the ones that interacted with Hindu culture here physically at various times. They will be one of the races that we will eventually meet. The Iani will be first, because they look more like us and it'll be less traumatic, and then and they will assist us in getting to know the ones they work with, which are the Maharaji, which are the blue humans. But right now, we're in an interesting place, and that place, the main events that led us to this place took place in the last Atlantean period drama. In that drama, the script was written and programmed into the radio body. The script didn't finish running. It just started running in 22,326 BC, when the guardian races shut the gates, which means they pulled the plug on the computer, so the program couldn't run. Well, the plug is back in now. Fortunately, it's on a D12 current. It's like upgrading it from in the States we have 110 and 220 electrical current. I don't even know what it is in European countries. But we have an upgrade as far as the current running. But the program is still in the grids. It's still in the radio body. And it's a program, because we're all connected to the planetary radio body. Our own radio bodies exist as part of the planetary radio body. It means there's going to be a script that begins running through our own radio bodies, which runs through our DNA, which will be a script on a personal level of impulses, feelings, sometimes thoughts. We never stop to think, I'm thinking, where did that thought come from? We assume it's ours. it's going to be a good time to become aware of the fact that not every thought that moves through your head belongs to you. Not every feeling that runs through your emotional body belongs to you. All right? Did you ever stand next to somebody who was having like a real bad day and you could just feel the negative energy coming off them, right? And did you ever find that you went home and a couple hours later you're just feeling really yucky? And you can't think of a reason why? You took on, through field resonance, some of the stuff that was standing next to you. You're processing through your own system. And the healers have a big problem with this sometimes if they don't know how to clear that out, because you will start to take on the scalar waveforms from other beings or things around you. Now, this can be done purposely as well, and this is how the script technology works. There's an interface with the human biosystem, with the Homo sapien biosystem, that allows the radio body programs that are being sent through Nibiru and through Wormwood from Wisadak to move through our systems, where it's almost like having an angel and a devil on your shoulder, where you have one saying, oh, I really like the Azurite teachings, like I can feel the freedom there. The other saying, oh, no, that's evil. It's telling you not to like Archangel Michael. It's telling you not to like Jehovah. You know, I mean, it can create, if you let it, this polarity in yourself that's very, very hard to rectify until you start asking yourself the question, where did that thought come from? Do I own it? Is it mine? Or am I having help thinking that thought? If we can realize we get a whole lot more help than we ever thought. And it's scary when you think about it. This is like, it's like soul rape, what's being done here, not to mention mind rape, because you're literally having something put things in your mind. It's like one of those horrid sci-fi movies that, you know, they have a technology that will let them beam into your brain things that make you do what they want you to. They do have this technology, and it's being used here. It has been since Atlantis. But now is the final big hurrah in the game, when they turn on all the switches and all the programs. Now, if you're working with D12 frequency, and particularly if you're working with the Vecca codes, you will progressively build an immunity to that, where you will progressively, you might start realizing that there's a weird space you can realize when you start to feel like, wow, it's like a CD is playing in my head. That's not mine. You'll start to find this whole cluster of ideas or thoughts, sometimes it's emotions, that, you know, where in the world does that fit? And they're usually yucky, or they're meant to direct you in a certain way, and they really seem like they belong to you until you really stop your consciousness, get calm, and say, what is this? Where is it coming from? Do I own it? And really realize you might not. All right? I mean, once you realize you don't own it, then you have to own it, which means you have to say, okay, I'm not going to blame anybody for this. What am I going to do with it? Because the idea is to stop it from influencing you. The antidote to the radio body programming, which I call the CD in your head, is that's really what it works like. It's a CD that's operated off something called the Metatronic seed atom, and these are clusters of literally those. You know how we talked about the eyes, the lenses, the refraction polarization lenses. Well, these were built into part of our atomic structure here, through the Metatronic mutations. So we have within our bodies a Metatronic seed atom that is the disc player. And it's through that we receive information from the radio body program that's running through the planetary grids. And it literally plugs into our personal little disc player and begins to run the CD. And it's like a CD-ROM in your head. There is only one antidote to that. If you can recognize that it's there, you need to do that before you'll realize you need an antidote. But it's not something you can rationalize with or reason with. It's not a part of your natural, even shadow self, that you're going to say, okay, well, I'll embrace you with love and I'll heal you. You can look at it as an electronic program. It's not going to respond to you as a person because it isn't a person. It's a program. It's energy. And there's only one way to not have that energy move through your system, and that's use energy in the right way to block that from being able to affect your system. That's where running the D12 and higher frequency and the natural mathematics that go with the body pattern, the Vecca codes and the Eka codes, that's where they all come in. These are the things that will give us the most protection from the Metatronic atom program. And we're all living with this. This is our Gaian heritage, because it began with the fall of the Azurite races and the creation of races that had the Metatronic atom coding. And that's, if you want to look at the Metatronic atom, it's the 7 the 7 spheres as opposed to the 15 spheres. You know, they talk about the seed of life and those kind of things, which is the seed of the flower of life, those kind of things. They are built on the 7, and they form a particular type of Merkaba field. They form the Biveka Merkaba field, which is fine if you let it keep growing until its natural Triveka Merkaba that it's supposed to. But it's a phase-locked Biveka Merkaba that the bottom part of the bottom can't spin. This is part of what our Merkabas are doing right now. It's part of what the planetary Merkabas are doing right now, and it's part of what we're trying to overcome. Now, the history of the Atlantean mess, as I tend to refer to it, it's fascinating. There's a huge amount of detail. On this page, where it says Creation of the Leviathan Force and related history, this gives you a basic idea of a little bit of what came before, just a real rough rundown. We have 250 million years ago, a angelic human seeding one took place on parallel Earth, and they were called the Palladorian cloisters. 25 million years ago, the 5 Palladian cloister races were seeded on Earth over here. So we've been here for 25 million years. 5,500,000 years ago, human seeding 1 on Earth was destroyed in the electric wars. 3,700,000 years ago, human seeding 2 was started. 848,800 years ago, human seeding 2 was destroyed via the Thousand Years' War. And all of these wars, guess who they were with? It's like the same beings. It was the Anu Elohim and the fallen Draconian races versus the Emerald Covenant races. And it was all about Templar quest, which is territorial quest for the Stargates. But it wasn't just Stargates on one planet. It was Stargates in this whole 15-dimensional time matrix that they were after. Now, 798,000 BC, we had the 5 Palladi-Urtite cloister races were seeded here. This was seeding 3, the beginning of seeding 3. You can read, because I'm not going to go into talking just about our seedings. What I want to do is get to the Leviathan races. Just know from 798,000 BC, that was the beginning of our 3rd seeding, and our races progressively, were put here, the angelic human and the indigo races. Then, there were a couple of other things that happened where between 669,000 BC and 250,000 BC, there were the Rama and the Templar wars, and these were a mess. You had Anunnaki and Draconian invasions from all over, spaceship invasions. Things coming in with like sonic beams, photosonic beams that could make matter dematerialize when it got hit with it. Big wars, that kind of thing. We had a race of pre-Leviathan fallen angelic hybrid things called the Nephidim. They were Draconian, and another called the Urantia. These were Jehovian Anunnaki hybrids. These were the beginning of the Illuminati races. The Illuminati races were upgraded from this point and merged with something else. Now, that I'll talk about in a minute. In this period of the Rama and Temple Wars, the races, the Nephidim and the Urantia races, were not able to fully procreate with angelic human races. They were originally created through forced laboratory experimentation in some of the earlier seedings. And in some of the earlier seedings, in seeding 2, there was an experiment done, again a bioregenesis experiment to try to help the fallen ones, that allowed natural procreation between the angelic human races and a certain small collective of fallen ones supposed to be not, wanting to get out of being fallen. And that turned into absolute disaster. That's where we ended up with a seed race that went on, and they took it off planet. The fallen angelics took it off planet, and it became kind of like a core genetic template to upgrade their progressive building of a master invader race. Now, we learned our lesson in seeding 2, so we're going to do that again right away. And in seeding 3, the angelic human races and the indigo races were created in a way that they could not naturally hybridize, naturally procreate with any of the fallen angelic forces, which gave them protection from the fallen angelic forces. In 250,000 BC, there was a period of time where you had what are called the Palladian, Nibiru, and Anunnaki races. They're from Nibiru and from the Pleiades star system. These were the guys that in Sumerian history came down as Enki and Enlil and Marduk. Those gods, yeah, they were gods. They were race lines that, when we get into the genealogies, that we won't get too heavily into today, but these were race lines of fallen angelic Anunnaki races. Some of them crossed with one thing, some of them crossed with another. The Enki, Enlil, and Marduk races, Anunnaki races, were considered, what do they call them? You had the Jehovian, there's a name, the Anu Seraphim. These were called the Anu Seraphim Anunnaki races. They weren't the original strain. The original strain were Anu Elohim, out of the Giovanni crew, and they were called the Jehovian Anunnaki races. The Jehovian Anunnaki races looked at themselves as the true, pure strain Anunnaki, and they didn't like the other ones. The other ones had crossed with various ones of the fallen Seraphi, be it draconian ones or some of the things that the draconians had created. So the Pleiadian Nibiruan Anunnaki races are Anunnaki races that have partial Seraphi or draconian type coding. You have the Enki, Enlil, Marduk groups. What were the full names of those? They're in Voyages, Volume 2. The Enki Zephelium. Okay, Enki Zephelium races, the Enlil Odedicron. Okay, so if you look at the Enki Zephelium, now Zephelium were one of the fallen races that are connected to the Zeta races that we talk about now. And they were a reptilian snake type cross. Okay, so you took Anunnaki, which was a core Anunnaki, was an aquatic ape. All right, that was the original form. An aquatic ape hominid was the original Anunnaki form. So you take that and you cross it with, for an Enki family line, they would crossed it with the Zephelium. So it's Enki Zephelium. That's the Toth line. All right. Now Toth was a Nibiruan Anunnaki. He was out of the Enki family. Okay. Now Enlil crossed with Odedicron, so they call him the Enlil Odedicron. Now that would be a more reptilian, fully reptilian, as opposed to snake, more of a reptile, think salamanders and things. Okay. Then you have the Marduk group, which crossed with Omicron, which were the dragon moth people and the dinoids. So these are the Anu Seraphim Anunnaki races. And they've forever been trying to get the territory here. These are the ones that set up the Nibiruan Datic crystal grid in 25,500 BC. But way back in 250,000 BC, they were coming in here speculating for various things. One of the things they were speculating for was gold, because they had depleted Nibiru's resources of organic gold. Now they used gold in a very specialized way. They, through laboratory ionization, they call it, they create what's called, in contemporary terms, and it used to be called this in Egypt too, white powder gold, which is a substance that has the ability to create, let's say, electrical sparks within the atomic structure that allow more energy to be pulled in from the field around you, so it assists in sustaining immortal life. Not eternal life, but immortal life. There's a difference. You don't want to be immortal. Eternal, yes. Immortal, there are better things to do. But because they were running out of natural gold in their planetary system, and the Pleiadian system was devoid of it, it didn't have any to mine, Earth was very rich in organic, elemental gold. They literally, on Nibiru, once they created Nibiru in a way where it was in its artificial orbit, and it's an orbit that runs partially through the Phantom Matrix and then back up through our gates and into our system. It used to be in our system completely, but when it fell, they created an orbit that runs between the two systems, and every 3,657.8 years it cycles back through. So to sustain their atmosphere, they had literally changed their atmosphere, and you found a way to imbue this elemental gold ionized particulate structure into this white powder gold substance into their atmosphere, so they breathed it. And after many generations of that, it sustained the Metatronic body, is what it did. It helped to sustain the Metatronic body. After many generations of this, they couldn't survive without it. And there was all sorts of mutations happening on their planet with their peoples, because they were running out of the amounts of gold needed to create this in the atmosphere. So they were on speculation journeys, trying to find places where they could rob more gold from. And this is where we got our original value of gold, actually, why it's so important. That was an Anunnaki trait. It's very important to the Anunnaki races because it helps them to sustain their immortal status in their bodies. And now that their bodies are mutated fully into the Metatronics, if they don't have some degree of that frequency that's created through white powder gold in their systems, they begin to rapidly deteriorate. Their physical forms rapidly begin to deteriorate, and their consciousness begins to fragment because they don't have a soul structure anymore that they're directly connected to. So in 250,000 BC, you had the Enki, Enlil, and Marduk, Palladian, Nibiru, and Anunnaki coming in and attempting to mine gold. And they started warring with each other because nobody liked to work the mines. And it was like, well, why should we work the mines? You work the mines. And they started to war with each other. So they decided to end that war amongst themselves. They were going to create a slave race, a slave race that would do the mining for them. And we were on the planet at the same time. The angelic humans and the indigos were. And we were in, like, certain parts, usually associated with the Stargate and the Q-site locations. They were always our seeding grounds. And there are lots of raids by these guys trying to, grab humans and do things with them. But they decided to create, they didn't want something as intelligent as an angelic human, because you're not going to control it, basically. They wanted something a cross between an animal and something that had some degree of intelligence where you could put it on autopilot and it would do what you told it to. So they created a race called the Lulcus. They created the Lulcus by taking their own imprint, their aquatic ape hominid imprint, and combining it with the gene code, a small portion of the genetics of angelic humans that had been captured in their raids. And they did it in a laboratory. They created it in a laboratory, like our scientists are starting to play around now. And they combined it with the angelic human, their aquatic ape, and I believe two other. One was an ape-like strain of animal from Nibiru, and the other was a monkey strain. It was a strain of monkey primate from from this planet. And what they came up with, or what we call, our scientists call, the Neanderthal. That was the beginning, and that's where the Neanderthals fit in. These had nothing to do with human evolution. They weren't a part of it at all, but boy, have they tried to put Darwinian theory in there, so we start to think of ourselves as them. All right, so they created the Lulcus Neanderthal. They were called the Lulcus. They were a primate hominid slave race, and they were able to create them, and they had a certain sophistication of intelligence, even though other ways they were very slow-witted compared to what a human is now, even now as Homo sapiens. But they had genetics that had a little bit of the angelic human imprint because of the part that they had literally robbed from the gene code. It's like grabbing a body, killing the person, but taking part of the DNA and using a select part of that DNA to cross it with other DNA. This is how they did it. It's laboratory messing. All right, so that created the slave races of the Neanderthal. In 246,000 BC, there was, and this was like the beginning of a new wave of evolution after the Rama Wars and the Temple Wars, where they created a mess. I mean, it was getting close to becoming another Electric Wars situation where everything got destroyed. And finally there were some agreements made. And in 246,000 BC, the Maharaji, which are the blue humans from Sirius B, on behalf of the Iani and the founders, brought in the Emerald Covenant restatement, which brought in the information about the Emerald Covenant again, brought in the CDD plates, and said, any of you, be you hybrid or not, if you want to join the Emerald Covenant, you can. So this is when we were given the last set of CDD plates, the ones that we're drawing information from now. They were given in 246,000 BC. Now, interestingly, all of the angelic humans agreed to, yes, of course we want to do Emerald Covenant. We've always been Emerald Covenant. But the Thoth Enki Anunnaki decided to go over into the Emerald Covenant at that period. So that was 246,000 BC, when Thoth, as a being, Thoth was an Anunnaki being, entered the Emerald Covenant for bioregenesis to get their DNA template back. Now, Thoth went through, as a person, went through his own levels of bioregenesis, and he did very, very well. He got up to 11 strands, but he didn't get the 12th one before he bailed out and went the other way. But the Thoth Enki Anunnaki races, they entered for bioregenesis, and there was a series of steps in this bioregenesis that was taken. It wasn't all, you didn't get all of the strands healed immediately. There was a progressive integration of one strand after another that would take place over numerous generations to slowly build up the pattern of the D12. The angelic human hybrid strand would be put into the Anunnaki strands. What it would do is, if you look at the strands, is one angelic human strand had all the natural mathematics of the divine blueprint that goes with this time matrix. The Anunnaki strand had it all in reverse and didn't have 12, let's say, units. Okay, so we have 12 units in one angelic human strand. They only had 11 units. The draconian ones only had 10 units in each strand. So they had to progressively, for each strand, build up a 12 subharmonic pattern where they'd get that extra back and reverse it back to its natural mathematics before they would be compatible with the frequencies in the natural time matrix, before they could run the divine blueprint frequencies again. So this was what this experiment was about. It wasn't an experiment to see what had happened. It was an experiment that was done, a healing experiment that had the objective of healing this particular group of Anunnaki who decided to go into the Emerald Covenant. In 208,216 BC, this was a stellar activation cycle, and consistently with the rest of our history, during every stellar activation cycle, there's an invasion of some sort, and there was a Drac invasion this time that created what was called the Fall of Brennaway. This was when, literally, in doing the round tables, all right, the rainbow round tables that the guardian races were always appointed to do to run the Templar here in order to assist the planet in grounding the Stargate frequencies. They were infiltrated and invaded, and the rounds began being run in reverse because people were careless, and there was a lot of intermarrying between Nephilim, draconian hybrids that supposedly were being good guys now working the Emerald Covenant, and angelic human races. And angelic humans didn't realize that they were getting code reversals in their DNA template, so when they ran the rounds, they ran them in reverse. And there's a major pole shift that took place in that period because, again, the gates had to be shut. They had to be shut, or our whole template, Earth's template, would have gone into phantom matrix completely. So in 208,216 BC is when we lost our ability to run D12 frequency, because what's called the stellar bridge, which is that frequency spiral, the Merkaba spiral of the universal level, that spirals the frequency down from D12 through all the universal gates to us, it's supposed to anchor on what's called a 12-code pulse. 12-code pulse means every dimensional frequency band has 12 subharmonics. It didn't. It anchored on a 10-code pulse, and they blocked the other part out with the reversal of the round tables. So from that point on, we were like sitting ducks here because we didn't have D12 frequency available. We only had D10 frequency available. That means we couldn't reset anything with the divine blueprint without the D12 frequency to come in and reset it. So after this, there was, life went on. There was a pole shift, and there was a bringing the races during these times were taken into the inner earth, like the angelic human races, and any of the hybrid races that could sustain the strand activation would be taken into inner earth and allowed to hang out there until it stabilized on the surface. Then they'd be brought back out, and the angelic humans were always reseated on the 24 sites, the 12 Q sites and the 12 Stargate sites. That was their home, and their DNA is literally keyed to those grids. So we all have literally a place on the planet that we belong to, and it technically belongs to us. We belong to each other. All right, now. In 155, wait a minute, 155,000 BC, this is when the Anunnaki bioregenesis program begins in full. Now, way back in 246,000 BC is when the Tothenki group entered the Emerald Covenant, but it wasn't until 155,000 BC, because of all the chaos that was going on, that it actually began, where the hybridization program began. And the Lucas Neanderthal races, because they had a little bit of the human imprint, were used as the base species for this hybridization. So the Lucas Neanderthal were combined with a pattern, a piece of the DNA from another race called the Hibernian humans. The Hibernian humans had to do with seeding too, and certain races that were created through hybridizing between human and Anunnaki races. They were a type of Nephilim, actually, Nephilim human, but they were of the Ruby order that were trying to get their full imprint back originally. So upgrade number 1, they went from Locust Neanderthal to what are called the Luhari, which was Cro-Magnon 1. And then in 152,000 BC, the Luhari hybrids were crossed with the Urantia-Urtite cloister humans, and upgrade 2 was done, and they created the Iluli Levi. Here we get the races of Levi and such. This is where we get the word Leviathan. Now, the Iluli Levi, Cro-Magnon 2, was the first one of the hybrids that was capable of natural procreation with a human, where it could actually conceive a child and bear a living child with a human. The others were still not genetically compatible to that degree, where fertilization would most often not occur, and if it did, it would be highly mutated and it would die. The child could not be born by them. This began the chaos, technically speaking, because if you now have a hybrid race, and if you get a hold of that hybrid race and you're a fallen angelic, and you know that race can now naturally procreate, all you have to do is have your hybrid race rape humans, and you will create progressively more of your own in human form. And this is what began the craziness that became the Leviathan invasion. But the bioregenesis continued for the races. The Tothenki groups were still a part of this. They were still working with it. And the Tothenki groups are interesting because, remember how I said before, they were of the Anu Seraphim, which means they were Anunnaki combined with certain of the fallen Seraphim, which were the Draconians or the Reptilians. So they could actually, by using their DNA, they could actually allow for both Draconian races to incarnate into them and Anunnaki races. So it was a hybrid form that could be used to do bioregenesis for both fallen Seraphim races like the Draconians or Reptilians and fallen Anu Elohim races like the Anunnaki. That was also part of the downfall because both of them could infiltrate that race, therefore. All right. So 152,000 BC we had Cro-Magnon 2, the Iluli Levi races. From the Iluli Levi races, it went up from there. 151,000 BC, upgrade 3 was done. Iluli Levi became Iluli Judah. This is where we get the races that were transposed in our biblical text. They're not our tribes of Israel. These are the tribes of the Leviathan, and they were not part of those original biblical texts. The original 12-tribe human races were part of those original texts, and they transposed their race identity and their records into our books. Okay. 150,000 BC, there's a mess, but we had a glacial period after that one because the Jehovian Anunnaki attacked here and tried to take over, but they didn't win. But they crashed the firmaments, which are called hydrosuspension fields that controlled the planetary climate. We actually had planetary climate control at various periods where you could, kind of like your car or your house, you set it on climate control, how much humidity you want, what temperature you want, that kind of thing. You can do that with the crystal pylon temples of inner earth, of the, Eka line. They can modulate the frequencies here in a way that through our gates we can get climate control. And when they're working properly. So in the Jehovian wipeout in 150,000 BC, we had a glacial period because a large part of our firmaments, or the hydrosuspension fields, collapsed. 148,000 BC, the next upgrade was done. The upgrade 4 created the Iluli Nephi races, and then there was a whole bunch of these guys, the Nephi races, that were infiltrated by Jehovian Anunnaki and created the what are called the Nephites. This is why certain teachings say, hail the return of the Nephites. They're supposed to be coming back in this time period. Not something to hail unless you're looking forward to becoming a Jehovian Anunnaki. And these large numbers of these have joined the Wesedek groups, from this history forward. So the return of the Nephites has to do with the return of the Metatronic coding. Here we go again. Every stage of this hybridization program had its pros and its cons. Meaning pros, that it was actually serving the purpose it was intended for the ones who stayed in the Emerald Covenant, the Toth groups, then other ones that came in. One of the ones that came in later, I believe, in fact in this period, I think, this is the first period they came in, 148,000 BC, the being called Enoch, who had been an ascended master, and the good guy side had come in and incarnate specifically through the Jehovian Anunnaki fallen pattern to be able to try to bring them back up into bioregenesis. The Enoch crew got involved, and these were the Arcturian Jehovian Anunnaki races from the Arcturus system, from Orion and Arcturus, and they were different from the Pleiadian Nibiruan ones, and they tended to not like each other very much. They got involved with the Nephi level. They came into the experiment at the Nephi level. And so then you had two groups of Leviathan race, or Leviathan because they're all out of Levi, but usually we use Leviathan in terms of the Illuminati, what became the Illuminati. But there were two branches of these hybrid races that were created. One were the sons of Belial, and the others were the sons of Zadok. All right. And which were the reversals of, they were originally the sons of Lilib, the Lilibim, which were Thoth's crew, the ones that were on the good side. And this is where you get like the Lilith mythologies that come out of that. And the Zadokim, or the Kodazim. And they actually reversed the letters once groups of them became, fallen. They reversed them, so you had the Lilibim turned into the sons of Belial, and you had the Kodazim becoming the sons of Zadok. And these became prominent figures in the Atlantean period. I mean, at this point, we're still not into the height of Atlantean culture yet. Atlantean civilization really didn't come into being until, let's see, when was it? When the Atlantean root race was seeded. Atlantis was, the place was there, the cloister races were there, but it wasn't technically called Atlantis. That was a root race. It was a smaller race than the human cloister races that were coming in. It was a smaller branch of the human races. So anyway, this is the step-by-step process that the Leviathan or the Illuminati races were created from. They were progressively crossed, and the idea was to get them up to strand 5, where they would take the reverse 11 DNA pattern and work strand 1 all the way up to strand 5 into non-reversal through the hybridization. At that point, they could pass through Stargate 5 into the Terran time field in density 2. You could get them out of here, and they could continue their evolution from there to get the next set of strands. But all along, every step of the way, there were raider races, fallen angelics, that came in and grabbed portions of them and hybridized with them and then used them as tools to create their little armies where they would go raid other villages. I mean, it's still, even in our recorded history, it's classic, the plundering of one group that conquers another. They come in, they rape the women, they, trash the society, they force their belief systems on them. Well, there are continually more children being born by the raping of angelic human females. They would very often come into a village, raid it, kill the males, and rape the females, and kidnap them, keep them until they found out whether they conceived or not. And if they conceived, they would, bear the children. There's a big hatred vibe that a lot of women carry from being a part of that time period, where they hate children. And when they have their own children, they don't mean to hate children, but this emotional thing comes up where there's almost a desire to kill children because there was a violation that was done in that period, like in this pre-Atlantean period, where you were being forced to carry something that somebody else forced you to get pregnant with that was not going to have a human soul. It was going to have a fallen angelic soul. They would birth dark avatars in this way, and the women that were angelic humans that were forced into this type of breeding felt not only violated, but they knew they were contributing to the potential downfall of this planet. So there was a whole movement in the female consciousness that went into killing their offspring whenever they could, because they knew the souls coming into them were not human, and they were, of the other side. So this is some of the stuff we're still healing on a deep level. Women have a lot of that, and there's an anger that was in men. They felt very emasculated in the whole situation. They come in and be killed. They didn't want them for anything because they weren't gestation chambers like females were. So there's a lot of things we're still processing from this period. The Leviathan races, by the time we got up to, let me see, where, number 5, the 5th upgrade. The 5th upgrade didn't come until 68,000 BC. That's because there was a whole lot of other crazy things, like from 148,000 BC to 75,000 BC. That's a long period of time. It was called the Anu occupation. Humans actually lived underground because the Pleiadian, Nibiru, and Anunnaki had got together, and they'd come in and they'd taken over surface Earth. So they literally took over surface Earth and destroyed anything that wasn't of theirs, and were trying to either kill or kidnap and use human population. So literally human civilization went underground. A lot of us will have cellular memory that's about that, where we'll actually remember times when we were so sensitive we could hear a footstep hundreds of feet up above, up above us, because we lived underground. There are still many chambers that are left of the civilizations that were there, and there are other ones that were run by the negative ones as well, because there were periods when they went underground in relation to the dinoids, the dinosaur things. But anyway, because of the craziness that took place, that's a very long period of time. This is why the Anunnaki decided they owned the planet, because they come in and stole it, so they figured it's theirs. That's the typical, it's really the typical thing if you look at any of the politics that we're in the middle of right now. I mean, they're all fighting over stuff they stole from somebody else in the first place. It's like, anyway, when we get up to 68,000 BC, they finally did the last upgrade, and this was taking them from the Eluli Nephi up to the Anu Melchizedeks. This is where they were crossed with the fifth strand. They picked up the fifth angelic human DNA strand, the cloister strand of the Melchizedeks. And this is out of these guys, they end up with the Templar Melchizedeks. And the Templar Melchizedek priesthood, which is the total opposition to the cloister. Once in a while, when they decide to enter the Emerald Covenant, they actually assist. But most of the history, the Templar Melchizedeks were the ones that were the front men and beings for the Wesedeks. And there was a version of them that were also in the Phantom Matrix. So you had a division between them. One was for the Wesedek bonding, the other Metatronic bonding. The other group of them was for the Phantom bonding. But both of them were not anything to do with the Emerald Covenant. And right now, most of the Melchizedeks on the planet, the ones that woke up first, the ones that are going around and transmitting frequency to everybody and initiating them into the Melchizedek priesthood, most of them are Templars, which means most of them are Anunnaki. So, anyway, this was the progression, and I wanted the people who didn't hear this before to understand the progression of where these Leviathan Illuminati races that we talk about, where they came from. And it also answers the question of the Darwinian stuff. Where did the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon, where do they fit? Were these our human ancestors? No, they were not. They were the hybrid ancestors. The only connection to human they had was a little bit of human genetics that was put into their pattern to assist them to evolve to a higher level. They are not what we came out of at all. But there's been a whole movement since Atlantis. It was part of the Luciferian Covenant, which was an agreement made by the fallen Anu Elohim races, the Anunnaki races, that they would progressively orchestrate something called transposition of race identity, where progressively, using radio body programming, using progressive genetic infiltration, they would transpose their race identity over the angelic human and the indigo race identity, and they would take over the planet. And taking over the planet meant bringing it into Phantom and then into Wesedek Matrix. So this has been a long, long process here. This will give you some idea of how much we've all invested in this drama. There's a lot of vested interest going on here. This is why they're not going to say, oh, they're busted, they're blowing the whistle on us, they're telling on us, we'll just go away. They're not going to do that. This is the ending point of this drama and the beginning of a new series of dramas. 3 new ones, in fact, 3 new paths of Genesis. Now, from Atlantis, I want to show you really quickly. We start with the fact that you have these races, one collective of hybrids that are being run by the Thoth collective that are Pleiadian Nibiruan, and another group that came from the Nephi level and up that were run by the Enoch group. Now, the Enoch group was representative of the Jehovian Anunnaki, the ones that consider themselves the pure strains, that they weren't mixed with the Seraphim. Then you had the Thoth ones that were the Anu Seraphim, the mixed ones. So you had 4 basic groups at this point. You had the Lilibim, which were the ones of Thoths that were still on the Christos evolutionary path. And then you had the ones that were made of reversing the DNA of those guys. And they were the sons of Belial. And you had on the Enoch side the Kodazim, which were the ones still on the Christos path. And then the Zadokim, the sons of Zadok, which were the ones who went into reversal. Now, they didn't go into reversal all at once. There were experiments being made by hijacking them at every stage of evolution. But it really came to a head where the formalization of the sons of Belial and the sons of Zadok came in the Atlantean period after 25,500 BC It began with 22,326 BC when Thoth's group defected from the Emerald Covenant, and Thoth made deals with the Anunnaki races from Alpha and Omega Centauri. This is what you get where you get the Alpha and Omega Order Melchizedek races or Melchizedeks. For anybody that knows about the Melchizedek, ordination systems, they say, we are of the Alpha Omega Order. You'll also find that in books like the Enoch books, of the Alpha and the Omega. When Thoth made deals with the Alpha Omega Order Wisadek Anunnaki hybrids, this is when the fire sword initiations began, which means this is when he allowed his hybrids that he was put in charge of their evolution and getting them back into the Christos pattern. He allowed them, without asking them, he allowed them to begin receiving the frequencies transmissions of the flaming blue sword of Archangel Michael, that D13 reverse current that would begin the process of reversing their whole template. That began technically in 22,340 BC, right before the 326 BC, the 22,326 BC still activation cycle. That was the beginning of bringing fully into our race line the Metatronic distortion. But it's going to be more of a book that concentrates the history, where you see the whole history line. And when I talk about history, I'm really talking about the history from a very, very long time ago that moves up through the present. We've covered a lot of things for people who haven't been to workshops before. We have covered from the beginning times when life was seeded into this time matrix, not just on this planet, but into this 15-dimensional system, which began 950 billion years ago. That's a long time in Earth time calculation. And how that has led through a series of population of planetary systems, as we know them from Earth, what we would call planetary systems or star systems, and how that culminated in the seeding of Earth. Now, our history has been riddled with what we would consider to be war. There has been warring taking place in this time matrix for 250 billion years, which really isn't too bad if you look at the fact that from 950 billion years to 250 billion years, everybody got along well. So that was a pretty nice long stretch of peace. But it hasn't been peaceful here for a very long time. The people on Earth are in a very interesting place of consciousness, because when you come into Earth and you incarnate onto this planet, you're incarnating into, let's say, a little bubble. It's a quarantined reality field, and it's been quarantined for over 25,000 years. So people that are born on this planet come in with an innocence that is useful to some degree, but it is also an innocence that can be the downfall of this civilization. Because if a people don't know who they are and don't remember who they are, they don't remember where they came from or what larger drama their existence is a part of, it makes them very vulnerable for somebody to come in and fill in the blanks for them and tell them, oh, well, you're this, we created you, so now you follow us. In our recent history, say from Atlantis, 25,500 BC, up to the present, we have been like children on this planet. The races that were the guardians of this planet, that held huge history banks. I mean, this is when we were 12 feet tall and were breatharians. We didn't even need to eat because we had full control. This is what a human was. It was a being who had full control of its ability to manifest and demanifest. We did not need to eat foods. We did not need to, we had different organ systems in our bodies because of the advancement of our gene code. And we were innocent, but all-knowing. There is a place of being where you can be in innocence, but not unaware innocence. We were in aware innocence. Since 25,500 BC, and really it began before that, but the big axe fell during that period of time, and since then, we have been progressively becoming more lost within our hologram down here. We don't remember anymore that we're angels. We don't remember anymore that stargates even exist. Forget how to go through them. The fact that we don't have what we used to have is not an act of God. It's not an act of something that was supposed to be in the original divine blueprint for this planet or for this time matrix. But it was an act of, let's say, the interplay of stellar races that was allowed to occur, but only for a certain period of time. It was allowed to occur, and it's interesting. If we go through the history, we'll find, gosh, we've been victimized. That'll be one of the first things that pops out. How could God let anybody do this to us? This wasn't nice. This was like worse than not nice. This was awful. What has happened here has been awful in that context, but we as humans, incarnating into this reality field, we chose this. We allowed this to take place for certain lessons that we wanted to learn. We were sent on, let's say, a kind of like cosmic doctor's mission. There were races that had fallen, races that were even more ancient than the human race. The human race was created as a doctor race, in a way, that we were going to come in and figure out how to fix it. The best way to find out is to find out what was really causing the problem. So we allowed ourselves to come into a situation where we would experience some of the same genetic mutations and loss of conscious awareness and twists of conscious awareness that those mutations created. So we allowed what has taken place. When we look back at the recent history has been one of the most brutal legs of development on Earth. But that's only in this seeding. There's been 3 seedings of human beings on this planet. Some of you know this that have been to other workshops. Some of you don't yet know this. But 2 of the first 2 seedings were literally wiped out. They were wiped out by the same forces that are back. They're here again, just like we are. Constantly, this place has been under siege because it is a significant location within what's called the Universal Templar System. The Templar System refers to the organic Stargate system. The Stargate system is also the Ascension system, or the Descension system, whichever way you're coming, down or up. All right. The Stargate system is the system of, you could call them portals, Stargates. They're frequency modulation zones between the highest frequency spaces before matter has any density, all the way down to the systems that have full dense matter. The Stargate system is what allows any of us to come into the densification of the hologram that we experience as 3-dimensional reality. So the Stargate system, every reality field has a Stargate system, be it in this time matrix or in this cosmic cluster or in others. The Universal Templar is a small part, and we'll learn this in the Dance for Love program, where you start to see how our huge Templar is very small compared to the larger Templar that it's a part of when we get into the God World Templars. But our 15-dimensional system has 12 primary Stargates that control the matter systems. They go from pre-matter density at D12 all the way down to where we are here in dimensions 1, 2, and 3. And then there are higher systems of gates that have to do with the God worlds. But ever since the Lyran Elohim Wars of 250 billion years ago, there has been a problem in this time matrix. There has been created a system of Stargates that didn't belong here in the first place. They were created because of an event that took place where a certain group of Elohai Elohim became convoluted in consciousness because they had inbred themselves to the point where they had genetic distortion and they were not genetically what they had once been. Because if you cross something with itself enough times, you begin to get errant deviations of the pattern that you didn't expect, and you never know what's going to come out. And that's what happened with some of these Elohim beings. Because of their mutation of consciousness, they decided that they wanted to be masters of this universe. They decided they didn't want it to be a free will universe. They decided that they had the right to do that. And if anybody wouldn't cooperate with them, well, they will just get rid of anybody who wouldn't cooperate with them. So they started warring in the Lyran system. They call it the Cradle of Lyra. That's where our Stargates 12, 11, and 10 exist. They're the entry points into any of the lower density systems in this time matrix. When these wars occurred, the Elohai Elohim High Council, which were the ones in charge of Stargate 12, they were the High Council they were the closest ones to the Yanas, which are the Ascended Masters that are beyond being in the time matrix. They were commissioned as kind of the supervisory team to make sure everything went well in this particular time matrix, and they worked together with 2 other groups. You had the Elohai Elohim, the Seraphai Seraphim, and the Brahmarama races, and they had all agreed to something called the Emerald Covenant. The Emerald Covenant was a coevolution agreement that they would all agree to work a free will system here where we could explore the hologram and manifesting and creating in density. These were creator gods, parts of we were originally them. We got down here, but we were originally them. The Elohai Elohim, confronted with the problem of portions of their own race that had fallen to the point where they were beginning to war with the other races, they had also were watching this occur with the Seraphai Seraphim races. The Seraphai Seraphim races created avian life forms. They created reptilian and insectoid life forms. And some of theirs were also having the same problem, and they were fighting with the fallen Elohai Elohim. So there was a lot of conflict going on, and negotiations were tried to help these races re-evolve their genetic code so they could get their consciousness back, so they could stop fighting with each other. But the Eli Elohim decided to take they were called the Anu Elohim, that was one particular family of them, decided to take matters into their own hands. And if the Elohai High Council wasn't going to help them, then they would simply get rid of the Elohai High Council, and then they would go and get rid of the draconian races that they didn't want here either, and they'd play Masters of the Universe, and this would be their time matrix. And they attempted and succeeded in destroying Stargate 12. Now, Stargate 12 is in a planet called, or a star from here, called Aramatena Lyra. When you look up in the Lyran system here, it's what they call the double-double in Lyra. So that's like, on the star charts, they would call that the double-double. That was the area of Stargate 12. It was in that planetary system. When Stargate 12 was destroyed, there was a big problem for this time matrix, because the 12th dimensional frequencies hold what's called the divine blueprint. That's the full mathematical program for everything that's to be manifest in this system is held in scalar wave form within the 12th dimensional frequencies. When Stargate 12 was destroyed, it was fragmented. Those scalar wave forms were fragmented and ripped apart, and part of them went into what's called reversal, which means if you have, let's say, a mathematical program that runs number 1 through 20, take that and flip it around, and you have 20 running through 1. All right, it's a lot more complicated than that, but it's the same concept of a reversal. The mathematical program was running reverse on part of this system. This creates what's called a black hole. As far as science goes, in our contemporary times and sci-fi and that kind of stuff, they talk about black holes. Science here doesn't know a lot about black holes or what they do. But black hole systems are literally systems that, if you think of a pair of nylon stockings, and you know how they get a hole in them, and then it starts to get runners all over the place, and then the hole eats the rest of them eventually, so you throw them away. Well, you can't throw time matrices away. But black holes work like that, that once a hole is poked in the natural fabric of the scalar wave form, the energy that has gone into that fragmentation begins to reassemble itself in chaotic fragmented form. So let's say you had an alphabet of what we call fire letters or scalar wave forms that created a very beautiful, ordered type of universe where things worked well. And you rip those apart and you get alphabet soup, and you throw half of the alphabet soup over this way and half over this way. The one that got thrown over this way became the black hole system, and it reordered itself on an unnatural mathematical program. That unnatural mathematical program did, however, allow for the system to continue, which means the light forms that got taken down into that particular matrix, and it was called the phantom matrix, they were able to, as consciousness, sustain and put themselves back together to a degree, and they formed creator gods in the phantom matrix. And those creator gods were the same ones who tried to blow up the stargates in the first place. They didn't get the whole time matrix, but they got part of it. And they created phantom matrix. And their main objective was to get the rest of the energy off of the main matrix, because they were not self-sustaining. When a black hole system is created, the only thing it can do to sustain itself is to draw energy from the matrix it fell from. If that door is closed in the matrix it fell from, it becomes a finite system that implodes in on itself. And when it implodes, we can never be away from God. But there's two ways to go home. One is fully aware and knowing it. The other is as space dust. You're still holy when you're space dust. You just don't remember it, and it doesn't have much meaning to you at the time. So the system called the phantom matrix, which is the beginning of the plight of war in this time matrix, is a system that is structured. They have matter like we do now, because since the Lyran Wars, since the black hole was created, they have progressively found ways to artificially order the energy that they could suck into their system. They have pulled planets into their system. They have pulled galaxies into their system from this time matrix. We're in the middle of a very long drama. We're in the middle of the end of a very long drama. Because for many, many billions of years, there's been a rescue mission going on here, trying to get races to evolve back out of the phantom matrix, back out of the black hole system, so they can get their Christic imprint back. The Christic imprint belongs to everybody, not just Christians. In fact, the people that call themselves Christians in this day and age that are more interested in telling you that you have to listen to the Bible the way it's written by the Council of Nicaea more than they're interested in finding out what Christianity is really about. The Christic imprint is your divine blueprint scalar wave pattern. We all come in with one, at least we originally did. Now the people in the black hole system, the races that have evolved from there, they no longer have that. They have created races upon races from their system that were born without what's called a Christic spark. That means they don't have the original ordered mathematics as the basis for their template. So they've created many, many distorted forms, many, let's say, mutated children. The children of the phantom matrix became very much intertwined with the children of our matrix. And Earth became one of the main places where that took place. The intertwining of the phantom races and the natural angelic races on this side of the barrier, let's say, began way before we came to Earth. It began in the Gaian system. Now, when I talk about Gaia, I'm talking about density 3, dimensions 7, 8, and 9. It's an etheric matter density level, where we have physical matter here. Then density 2 is a stage between this level of physicality and etheric, where if you imagine what you think a ghost might look like, that kind of, you can poke your finger through it kind of matter, but it's still there, except it doesn't look that way when you're there. It looks just as physical when you're there. It just looks etheric from here. Right. Anyway, it began with Gaia. And it's funny because if you look at the Greek mythologies, Lady Gaia was a goddess. It was a goddess of the earth and things. Yeah, that was definitely true. They didn't tell you about density levels, and they took all the science away from it. But they personified Gaia and the names of a lot of things into the Greek mythologies and the Roman mythologies. But the problems began, that are affecting Earth, began in the Gaian system. And that began about 570 million years ago, where there was a whole bunch of wars, and it was always, you had the angelic races that were trying to assist the fallen races to get out of the black hole system before the black hole system was closed permanently. Because once it was closed, you couldn't get them back out again. So it was an act of love to keep the system open, to allow it to have enough energy by taking energy from the system so it could sustain long enough to try to evolve these people back into their original forms. But the warring it got progressively more intense from the time of 570 million years ago, because this is when the original guardian races that were here were called the Azarites. They were a collective race that was created by putting the genetic templates of the Elohai Elohim, the Seraphai Seraphim, and the Brahmarama races all together into one to create a race that was appointed as the guardians of the Templar of this time matrix. They were the original angelic race that was supposed to go in here and help the others evolve back out and make sure they didn't destroy a whole bunch of things in the process. Well, the Azarites became entangled in one of the major wars in the Gaian system. They were called the Gaian-Orion Wars, and it had to do with some of the draconian races in the fallen matrix that are associated with the Orion system, and it had to do with a number of other races. We'll get into more of that history when we talk about the Metatronic thing, because this is when Metatron became a problem for our time matrix. But in the meantime, this period, 570 million years ago, was a turning point in this time matrix. The Azarites encountered some problems where large numbers of them ended up in the Phantom Matrix trying to get the others out. So a new race had to be created to serve as the guardian race on this side, and that's where humans were created. We were originally called the Oraphim angelic human, and from the Oraphim came another type of human. It was a step down in the gene code. The Oraphim had anywhere from 24 to 48 DNA strand templates. When you step them down, they're called the indigo children this time around, for anyone who hasn't followed the work. Step down from there was the Turanicium II human, angelic human, and they were seated on Tara, where the Orpheum were seated on Gaia and in the Sirius star system and in the Lyran star system. And then the Turanicium II were seated in the Taran time system. Tara is the density 2 counterpart of Earth. That's dimensions 4, 5, and 6. And they're also time frames. Now they're simultaneous time frames. So you have these races and these parts of our races that exist right now in their space-time coordinates. They're still there just like we are here at this time. From the Turanicium 1s came the Turanicium 2s. The Turanicium 1 is the Taran Turanicium angelic human. The Turanicium 1 are the ones that came from there. Now the Turanicium 1s on Tara had 24 strand DNA templates. They went from 24 to 12, and then the Turanicium 1s had, I keep getting 1s and 2s. 1s were first, 1s were on Tara. They had 24 strand DNA, 24 to 12. And then out of them came the Turanicium 2s, the second experiment. And that was the Earth humans, the angelic humans of Earth. But they were also put here with Oriphims. The Orifim were the indigo children who were called the Magi. They were the Magi Grail line that were put on the planet to protect the angelic human races, the Turnicium races, so together we could all heal the Templar here and finish the mission. The mission has been here for a long, long time, and the mission was, when it was originally agreed by the high councils of the Christos founders races, there's a decision to be made 250 billion years ago. Do we close the Phantom Matrix now and stop it from getting any worse? Or do we keep it open to try to help these races evolve back out? Because if we close it, they're gone, and their evolution will lead them into space dust, which is okay. I mean, they are still a part of God. But when you go back as space dust, you don't go back and go back up. You are still within the hologram. You become part of the substance of the dimensional field within the time matrix that you got stuck in. So if your template gets fragmented, you end up as little tiny pieces of scalar waveforms with your consciousness not being able to talk to itself anymore. And you go back to dust, as they say, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You go back to consciousness dust, and you don't go fully back out of the matrix. You'll be the substance that something else comes into the matrix, evolves through. You will evolve back through another form, but you won't recognize yourself as what you originally came in with. So it was a big decision. Do we make sure they can't cause any harm? Because to blow up Stargate 12 and the Divine Blueprint in the time matrix is not a small thing. That was the point of original sin, and it was created by the Anu Elohim races. And that's why it even ended up in our Bible way down here this long. Since that time, it's even come all the way through history to this point. The decision was made to keep the time matrix open, the Phantom Matrix open, to see how many of them we could evolve back out. Because there were several races that weren't intended to go. One of the races that wasn't intended to go are called the Odedicron reptilians. They were out of the Seraphim family. They weren't the Draconians. Now, Draconians are called Omicron Draconians. They are different than reptilians. They have partial reptilian gene code at this point, but they started out as dragon moths. So they're like a reptile moth type being, and they evolved a lot of things out of there. They were the original fallen Seraphi race. But in the mess that was taking place in Lyra 250 billion years ago, when these wars were happening, the Odedicron reptilian races lived on the same planetary system in Vega Lyra, that the fallen Draconian ones lived on. And when the Draconians tried to fight back against the Anu Elohim from Stargate 11, which was in a planet called Avion in Lyra, they ended up getting sucked into the black hole with the Omicron and with the Anu Elohim. So it was primarily because of the Odedicron races that had not wanted, they were still Emerald Covenant. They hadn't done that on purpose. They just got stuck between a rock and a hard place and ended up in a black hole. A lot of it was, as I sized it up, it was basically, that's what happened to them. And there was great love from the founders' races for all of them, even the ones of their own who had tried to destroy them. I mean, it's like having a child that goes crazy. You still love the child, but you have to do something, or it's going to blow up the house and assassinate the neighbors and that kind of thing. And you may love it, but at some point you've got to restrain it or something before it, because it's not helping itself by doing those things either. So there was a lot of love. The decision to keep the matrix open was a decision of love, and it wasn't a decision that had to be made. There was absolute justification at that time to close the matrix. To say, you guys made a choice. You were warned about what that choice would do. Now you've harmed yourselves in a big way. Who are you going to blame? Now, they blamed High Council. Well, if you had destroyed the Draconians like we asked you to, we wouldn't have had to blow up your Stargate, right? This is the mentality. What's scary, did you ever listen to, lately, the conflict in the Middle East? Did you ever hear these people debate each other on TV when they have the representatives of the Palestinian side and the representatives of the Israeli side? Some of them carry that attitude, it's like, well, you made me do it. I have to go keep blowing people up because you make me do it. It's like, wait a minute, who's going to take some accountability for your own actions here? The whole argument goes way, way back. There are races all over this 15-dimensional matrix and phantom matrix that have these attitude problems where they don't want any responsibility for their choices. So they blame, and if you can blame somebody, then you've made a target for yourself. So you don't have to grow. You have to go and pick on them and try to suck their energy and mess them up, and then you feel vindicated. This is what has created the whole situation of perpetual warring. But anyway, we have a problem still with Phantom Matrix. It was left open because of love, and because that there's always, and it's still an attitude that's very much held by Christos races, where there's life, there's hope. You know? If it fell, it can rise again. You know, theoretically, anyway. And it was a big theory, because Council had never, Council was a council of creator God beings that used to be ascended master beings that weren't in matter, that, had decided that they would follow this imprint that Source created, that you could create matter systems, and, this could be neat. This was new to them, too. Uh-oh. What do you do when that happens? Help. Who do you talk to? You call up to the Janus Ascended Master groups. I think we have a problem down here. Did you ever hear of this one before? Is there any other matrix that this happened to? And there had been. Not too often, but there were a few other time matrix systems that had that, and some of them completely and totally imploded, which creates a major problem of restructuring. Because if you put enough holes in something, eventually the air or the life force energy goes out and the whole pattern falls to chaos. Source can't allow that to happen, or the whole arena of the hologram would fall apart. So whenever it gets to the point where there's a black hole that's trying to eat everything around it, there has to be a point where Source itself will intervene and say, okay, the balances are going to be reset. At that point, that could have happened in this time matrix 25 billion years ago. And there's still a lot of debate in Council as to, see, there's one group that said, we told you so. We told you, just do it now. Right? When there's the other group, there's the other group of bleeding hearts. Oh, but where there's life, there's hope. Yeah, I guess he was on that team. It's really funny. The reason I use the word light, love, and clueless a lot is because I spend a lot of my existence in the last 500 billion years in the light, love, and clueless space, which means, oh, if there's life, there's hope. Love it. Love it enough and it'll come back. Love it enough and it won't destroy you. Love it enough and it'll become good, even if it doesn't want to be. No, it won't. So there's a whole group of Council right now that kind of sits up there and goes, well, we don't like to say we told you so. We understand the love that you guys were coming from. And because it's a free will system, we honored your wishes. Happy now? Can we finish it now? The finishing has to do with simply resetting the divine blueprint completely. And that means opening the God world gates and allowing the frequency to come through that will put the regular mathematics back here that originally came here. But at this point, we should have done it before. When I look back and say, I was on that couch, I thought, oh, dear, I really should have gone the other way. But it seemed so heartless. It seemed like, you have this handful of fallen angelic races that used to be our brothers and sisters. We love them. We don't want to abandon them. Might have been put them out of their misery, and us too. Because right now, you not only have the original groups, you have billions of races that they've created. You have billions of hybrid races that they've created by coming through to this side and finding out ways to use artificial genetic engineering to combine the life forms from here with the life forms from there. We have allowed a mess to occur. And we had the greatest intentions in doing so. It was the intentions of love, and yes, you can heal it. We didn't know any better. You would think, theoretically, that whatever it is, if God made it, and God let it get broke, then God could fix it. Right? Well, some things, because of the order of the way the universe works, just the mathematics, the physics that are needed to create the hologram, some things are more easy to accomplish than others. Now, you can, if we did not have a free will time matrix here, if we wouldn't have been nullifying our own point by saying, okay, we're going to make them get better. Right? We're going to go in there, wipe their memory clean, put them back together, and then drag them out by the bootstraps. Now, that's more like the things they like to do, those kind of things. That would have been a violation of the free will of those who chose to take that path. So we had to find ways of re-education and of assisting them with what's called bioregenesis, DNA template regenesis. Because if you have your DNA template shattered and you don't have a D12 imprint anymore, the concept of Christ consciousness means nothing to you. It's like a language you've never heard before. You can't feel the unity vibration that comes from the D12 pattern. You can go and kill something and say, oh, that's neat. Wow, look at that when it dies. Wow, look at that. So that's what happens, and feel nothing. The beings in the phantom matrix don't feel in the same way that beings on this side do. The ones who have crossed between the hybrid people have a little bit of each, which is even harder, because it's like having a demon that lives inside of you, an angel and a demon at the same time, where the angel feels, but it doesn't quite understand what it's doing, and the demon comes through and says, oh, I want to do that, whack. And it goes smacking things and, hurting things, and the other part says, oh, should I maybe feel bad there? So we're in the middle of the end of the end of a drama.